The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the winding mountain road as the Johnson family's SUV made its way towards Yosemite's Tuolumne Meadows campground. Greg Johnson, a 38-year-old software engineer from Sacramento, gripped the steering wheel with a mixture of excitement and fatigue. Beside him, his wife, Sarah, 36, was engrossed in the campground map, planning their perfect spot. "How much longer, Dad?" came the impatient voice of their 8-year-old son, Max, from the back seat. Greg glanced in the rearview mirror, catching sight of Max's eager face and his 12-year-old sister, Emily's eye roll. "Not much longer, buddy. We're almost there." Sarah looked up from the map and smiled at her husband. "This was a great idea, Greg. We all needed this break from the city." Greg nodded, feeling a sense of pride. He had been planning this family camping trip for months, determined to reconnect with nature and give his kids the kind of outdoor experiences he cherished from his own childhood. As they rounded a bend, the vast expanse of Tuolumne Meadows came into view, its lush green grass swaying gently in the evening breeze. The sight elicited a chorus of wows from the back seat. "Look, kids," Sarah pointed out the window. "See those granite domes? That's what makes Yosemite so special." Emily, her nose usually buried in her phone, actually looked up with interest. "It's beautiful," she admitted, a hint of awe in her voice. Greg felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was exactly what he had hoped for, a chance for his family to appreciate the natural world together. They pulled into the campground, the gravel crunching under their tires. Families were scattered about, some setting up tents, others gathered around picnic tables enjoying early dinners. The air was filled with the mingled scents of pine needles and campfire smoke. "Okay, team," Greg announced as he parked the car. "Let's find our spot and set up camp before it gets dark." They piled out of the car, stretching their legs after the long drive. Max immediately darted off towards a nearby cluster of pines. "Max!" Sarah called out. "Stay close, honey. Remember what we talked about. We need to be careful of wildlife." "But, Mum, I want to explore," Max whined, reluctantly trudging back to the group. "There'll be plenty of time for exploring tomorrow," Greg assured him, ruffling his hair. "Right now we need all hands on deck to set up our home for the next few days." They found their assigned campsite, a cozy spot nestled among towering pines, with a view of the meadow in the distance. Greg and Sarah began unloading the car, while Emily and Max were tasked with clearing any rocks or pine cones from the tent area. "Emily, could you give me a hand with the tent?" Greg asked, pulling out the large canvas bag. Emily sighed dramatically, but moved to help her father. As they worked together to unfurl the tent and slot the poles into place, Greg seized the opportunity to connect with his often distant preteen daughter. "So what do you think of the campground so far?" he asked casually. Emily shrugged, but then looked around thoughtfully. "It's pretty cool, I guess. Different from what I expected." "Oh yeah? How so?" "I don't know. It's more peaceful. I thought it would be crowded and noisy like the campgrounds we see on TV." Greg chuckled. "That's why I love this place. It's a chance to really get away from it all." As the tent took shape, Sarah and Max returned from gathering firewood. "Look. What we found, Dad," Max exclaimed, holding up a pine cone almost as big as his head. "Wow, that's a big one, buddy," Greg said, genuinely impressed. "Why don't you add it to our nature collection?" While Sarah organized their supplies, Greg got to work on the campfire. The kids watched in fascination as he carefully arranged the wood and kindling. "Can I light it, Dad, please?" Max begged. Greg hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but you have to be very careful. Fire safety is crucial out here." Under Greg's watchful eye, Max used the long-handled lighter to ignite the kindling. Soon, a cheery fire was crackling in the fire pit, casting a warm glow over their campsite as the day's light began to fade. Sarah emerged from the tent, dusting off her hands. "Sleeping bags are all set up. Who's hungry?" A chorus of "me" rang out from the family. They gathered around the picnic table, passing around sandwiches and fruit that Sarah had packed for their first night. As they ate, Greg couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment wash over him. The worries of work and daily life seemed a million miles away. Here, surrounded by the beauty of Yosemite and the warmth of his family, everything felt right. "Okay, who's ready for s'mores?" Greg asked as they finished their meal. Max jumped. up excitedly. Me, even Emily perked up at the mention of the campfire treat. They gathered around the fire, skewering marshmallows on long sticks. The air filled with laughter as they competed to achieve the perfect golden brown roast, with Max inevitably setting his marshmallow aflame. As the evening wore on, the campground settled into a peaceful quiet. The crackling fire and the distant sound of crickets created a soothing symphony of nature. "Hey, look up there," Sarah said softly, pointing at the sky. They all tilted their heads back, gasping at the sight above them. Away from the city lights, the night sky was a dazzling canvas of stars, more than any of them had ever seen before. "Wow," Emily breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's like a whole different world up there." Greg smiled, putting his arm around Sarah. This was the moment he had been hoping for. His family united in awe of the natural world. As the fire died down to embers, Greg stood up, stretching. "All right, gang, time to hit the hay. We've got a big day of hiking ahead of us tomorrow." They doused the fire carefully, making sure every ember was extinguished. Greg did a final check of the campsite, ensuring all food and scented items were securely stored in the bear-proof container provided by the park. "Dad," Max asked as they were zipping up the tent, "are there really bears out here?" Greg paused, considering his answer carefully. He didn't want to frighten the kids, but he also knew the importance of respect for wildlife. "There are bears in Yosemite, yes, but they usually stay away from people if we're careful and follow the park rules." "Is that why we put the food away?" Emily asked, a hint of worry in her voice. Sarah nodded. "Exactly. We're visitors in their home, so we need to be respectful and not give them any reason to come near our campsite." As they settled into their sleeping bags, the sounds of the forest seemed to intensify. The rustle of leaves, the hoot of a distant owl, the scurrying of small nocturnal creatures. It was a symphony so different from their usual urban nighttime sounds. Greg lay awake for a while, listening to the steady breathing of his family and the whispers of the wilderness around them. He felt a deep sense of peace, grateful for this opportunity to share the wonders of nature with his loved ones. Little did he know that in the dark forest beyond their tent, curious eyes were watching, drawn by the lingering sense of their evening meal. As the Johnsons drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the adventures to come, nature was preparing to remind them of its wild and unpredictable heart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across Tuolumne Meadows, the Johnson family began preparing for their first night in the wilderness. The excitement of the day's arrival had given way to a comfortable weariness, the kind that comes from fresh air and new experiences. Greg zipped up the tent flap, creating a cozy cocoon for his family. "So all right, team," he said, clapping his hands together. "Let's go over our nighttime routine one more time." Sarah nodded, her face illuminated by the warm glow of their battery-powered lantern. "Good idea, honey. Kids, pay attention. This is important." 12-year-old I. Emily rolled her eyes but sat up in her sleeping bag. Max at 8 was more enthusiastic, his eyes wide with anticipation of the adventure. "First things first," Greg began, his voice taking on a serious tone. "No food in the tent, not even a tiny crumb. Why is that, Max?" Max's hand shot up as if he were in school. "Because of bears," he exclaimed, a mix of excitement and nervousness in his voice. Greg nodded approvingly. "That's right, buddy. Bears have an incredible sense of smell. Even the smallest bit of food can attract them." "But Dad," Emily interjected, a hint of skepticism in her voice, "are there really bears around here? I mean, we're in a campground." Sarah took this one. "Yes, sweetie. Yosemite is home to hundreds of black bears. They're usually shy and avoid people, but they can become dangerous if they smell food and try to get it." Greg moved to the center of the tent, making sure he had everyone's attention. "That's why we have our bear-proof container outside. All our food, toiletries, and anything else with a scent goes in there. No exceptions." "Even my lip balm?" Emily asked, looking mildly annoyed. "Even your lip balm," Sarah confirmed. "Bears are attracted to any scent that's out of place in nature." Greg continued, "If you need a midnight snack or have to brush your teeth, you wake one of us up. No one goes to the container alone, okay?" Both kids nodded solemnly, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "Now," Greg said, his tone lightening, "let's do one last check to make sure we didn't miss anything." The family began rummaging through their bags, double-checking for any forgotten snacks or scented items. Sarah methodically went through her toiletry bag, setting aside a small bottle of hand sanitizer and a pack of wet wipes to take to the bear container. As Emily dumped out her backpack, a small packet fell out. "Oh no," she gasped, picking it. I forgot about this gum." Instead of scolding her, Greg smiled reassuringly. "Good catch, Em. This is exactly why we do these checks. Can you please put it in this bag? I'll take it out to the container in a minute." Max watched this exchange with wide eyes, then suddenly remembered something. He dove into his own backpack, rummaging around frantically. "Max?" Sarah asked, noticing his sudden activity. "Did you forget something too?" Max emerged from his bag, his face a mixture of guilt and worry. In his hand was a slightly squashed package of beef jerky. I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I brought it for a snack on the hike tomorrow." Greg took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. "It's okay, Max. You did the right thing by telling us now. But you understand why this can't stay in the tent, right?" Max nodded vigorously. "Because of the bears," he said in a small voice. "That's right," Sarah added, giving Max a reassuring pat on the back. "It's much better to find it now than to have a bear find it later." Greg collected the gum from Emily and the jerky from Max, adding them to the bag with Sarah's items. "Okay, I'm going to run these out to the bear container. Everyone stay in the tent. I'll be right back." As Greg unzipped the tent and stepped out into the cool night air, Sarah turned to the kids. "While Dad's doing that, let's talk about what to do if we do see a bear." Emily, now fully engaged, leaned forward. "What do we do?" "Well," Sarah began, "the most important thing is to stay calm, no screaming or running. We make ourselves look big by standing together and raising our arms. We talk in low, firm voices to let the bear know we're human." Max's eyes were as wide as saucers. "What if it attacks?" Sarah shook her head. "Bear attacks are very rare, Max. Bears usually want to avoid us as much as we want to avoid them. But if one did get aggressive, we'd use the bear spray Dad packed. It's like very strong pepper spray." Just then Greg returned, zipping the tent behind him. "All secure," he announced. "Did I miss anything?" "Mom was telling us what to do if we see a bear," Max said, his voice a mix of fear and excitement. Greg nodded approvingly. "Good. It's important to be prepared. But remember, if we follow the rules and respect their space, bears will usually leave us alone." As the family settled into their sleeping bags, Sarah couldn't help but notice Max fidgeting. "What's wrong?" "Sweetie?" she asked. "I'm scared," Max admitted in a small voice. "What if a bear comes while we're sleeping?" Greg reached over and ruffled Max's hair. "That's why we have these air horns," he said, pulling out a small red canister from his bag. "If we hear anything suspicious, we can use this to scare away any curious animals. But I promise, as long as we've been careful with our food, we'll be fine," Sarah added. "And remember, we're not alone out here. There are park rangers and other campers all around us." This seemed to reassure Max, and he snuggled deeper into his sleeping bag. Emily, trying to appear nonchalant, casually scooted her sleeping bag a little closer to her parents. As the night deepened, the sounds of the forest grew more pronounced. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant rush of a mountain stream. It was a symphony of nature, both soothing and slightly unnerving to the city-dwelling family. Greg and Sarah exchanged a look over their children's heads, a mix of love and determination in their eyes. They were committed to giving their kids this experience, to helping them connect with nature despite the inherent risks. As the family drifted off to sleep, lulled by the gentle sounds of the wilderness, a faint scent lingered in the air. Despite their best efforts, a trace of the beef jerky's aroma clung to Max's backpack, unnoticed by the sleeping humans but detectable to the keen senses of the forest's wild inhabitants. In the darkness beyond the campground, unseen eyes watched, and unseen noses twitched, drawn by the promise of an easy meal. The night was still young, and nature, in all its beauty and danger, was wide awake. The forest fell into a deep, primal silence as the clock ticked past 2 a.m. The Johnson family slept soundly in their tent, oblivious to the subtle shifts in the night air. Unbeknownst to them, a curious black bear had caught wind of an enticing scent and was making its way towards their campsite. The bear, a young male about 3 years old, had been foraging in the outskirts of the campground for weeks. Human presence usually made him wary, but the persistent drought had made food scarce, pushing him to take greater risks. The faint aroma of beef jerky that clung to Max's backpack was an irresistible lure, promising an easy meal. With practiced stealth, the bear lumbered between the trees, his powerful nose leading the way. His dark fur blended seamlessly with the shadows, making him nearly invisible in the moonless night. As he approached the Johnsons' campsite, he paused, ears twitching at the sound of soft snoring coming from the tent. Inside, the family slept on, their dreams filled with the day's adventures. Greg and Sarah were curled up together, while Emily had burrowed deep into her sleeping bag, only a tuft of hair visible. Max lay sprawled on his back, one arm flung over his face, his backpack serving as an impromptu pillow. The bear circled the tent, his nose twitching with interest. He could smell the lingering scent of the evening's dinner, the sweet residue of s'mores, and most enticingly, the tantalizing aroma of beef jerky. He knew from experience that these strange fabric structures often contained food, and his hunger overrode his natural caution. With a low grunt, the bear rose onto his hind legs, towering over the tent. His sharp claws, designed for digging and climbing, easily pierced the thin fabric as he swiped downward. The sound of ripping canvas shattered the night's silence. Inside the tent, the noise jolted Greg awake. For a moment, he lay frozen, his sleep-addled brain struggling to process the sound. Then a heavy thud against the side of the tent sent a spike of adrenaline through his system. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, shaking his wife awake. "Wake up! Something's outside." Sarah's eyes flew open, instantly alert. "The kids," she breathed, her maternal instincts kicking in. Before Greg could respond, a massive, furry paw pushed through the newly created tear in the tent. Emily, awakened by the commotion, let out a terrified scream. "Bear!" Max yelled, scrambling out of his sleeping bag and towards his parents. The bear, startled by the sudden noise and movement, let out a low growl. He was confused and agitated, torn between his fear of humans and the promise of food. Greg's mind raced, recalling all the bear safety tips he'd read. "Stay calm," he said, his voice shaking slightly as he tried to project confidence. "We need to make ourselves look big. Sarah, get the kids behind us." Sarah nodded, her face pale in the dim light. She quickly gathered Emily and Max, pulling them close. "It's okay," she murmured, though her own heart was pounding. "Remember what we talked about, no sudden movements." Greg reached for the flashlight they'd kept nearby, his hands trembling slightly. He flicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating the bear's face as it pushed further into the tent. The bear blinked, momentarily stunned by the sudden light. It let out another growl, this one more uncertain. "Hey, bear!" Greg shouted, trying to make his voice as deep and intimidating as possible. "Get out of here," Emily whimpered, pressing her face into Sarah's side. Max, despite his fear, peeked out from behind his mother, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and fascination. The bear, confused by the light and noise, took a step back. But the scent of food was still strong, and hunger drove it forward again. It swiped at the tent, its powerful claws shredding more of the fabric. Greg's mind raced. The bear spray was in his backpack, just a few feet away, but he was afraid to make any sudden movements. "Sarah," he whispered, "I need to get the bear." "Spray, keep talking to it." Sarah nodded, swallowing hard. "Hey, bear," she called out, her voice quavering slightly. "You don't want to be here. Go on, get out of here." As Sarah continued to shout, Greg slowly inched towards his backpack. The bear, agitated by the noise, paced back and forth in front of the torn section of the tent, occasionally pushing its head inside. Max, emboldened by his parents' actions, suddenly piped up. "Go away, bear. This is our tent." The bear's head swung towards the sound of the small voice, its eyes locking onto Max. For a heart-stopping moment, the bear and the boy stared at each other, a primal connection forming between predator and prey. Then, with a roar that seemed to shake the very ground, the bear lunged forward. "No!" Greg shouted, abandoning his slow approach and diving for his backpack. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the bear spray and spun around. The bear's massive form filled the rent in the tent, its hot breath visible in the cool night air. Greg raised the spray, his finger on the trigger, but hesitated. The bear was so close to his family, if he sprayed now, they'd all be affected. In that moment of hesitation, the bear's paw swiped through the air, its claws catching Greg's arm. Greg cried out in pain, the bear spray falling from his grasp. Sarah, acting on pure instinct, grabbed the fallen spray. "Close your eyes," she yelled, before depressing the trigger. A cloud of potent pepper-based spray filled the air. The bear recoiled, shaking its head violently and letting out a roar of pain and confusion. It backed away from the tent, pawing at its face. "Everyone out!" Greg shouted, clutching his injured arm. "Head for the car!" The family scrambled out of the shredded tent, Sarah herding the terrified children while Greg brought up the rear, keeping his eyes on the disoriented bear. As they ran, the commotion began to attract attention from neighboring campsites. Lights flickered on and voices called out in confusion and concern. The bear, still reeling from the spray, lumbered away from the campsite and back into the woods. But the danger wasn't over. The Johnsons huddled by their car, hearts pounding, as the sounds of the disturbed campground filled the night air. Greg wrapped his arms around his shaking family, wincing at the pain in his arm. "It's okay," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring them or himself. "We're safe now. We're safe." As the first shouts of bear in the campground began to echo through Tuolumne Meadows, the Johnsons clung to each other, their wilderness adventure having taken a terrifying turn they'd never anticipated. The Johnson family huddled together beside their SUV, their hearts racing as the chaos unfolded around them. The campground, once peaceful, was now alive with shouting voices and flashing lights, as other campers emerged from their tents to investigate the commotion. Greg, still clutching his injured arm, tried to maintain a calm facade for his family. "Is everyone okay?" he asked, his voice strained. Sarah nodded, her arms wrapped protectively around Max and Emily. "We're fine," she said, her voice shaky. "Greg, your arm—" Before Greg could respond, a beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on the family. "Is everyone all right over here?" a deep voice called out. A park ranger, alerted by the commotion, jogged towards them. "We're okay," Greg called back, wincing as he shifted his weight. "But there's a bear. It attacked our tent." The ranger reached them, his flashlight illuminating their pale, shocked faces. "I'm Ranger Mike," he said, his tone professional but reassuring. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" As Greg began to recount the events, Sarah noticed Max trembling against her. "It's okay, sweetie," she murmured, running her hand through his hair. "The bear is gone now." Emily, unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "It was my fault," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I forgot about the gum in my backpack." "No, it was me," Max interjected, his eyes wide with guilt. "I had beef jerky in my bag. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Ranger Mike knelt down to the children's level. "Hey, it's not your fault," he said gently. "Bears have an incredible sense of smell. Even if you'd gotten everything out, they might have smelled residual odors. The important thing is that you're all safe." He stood up, addressing Greg and Sarah. "I'm going to call this in and get some medical attention for that arm, sir. In the meantime, I need you all to stay here by your vehicle. We'll have the area secured shortly." As the ranger stepped away to use his radio, the family huddled closer together. The sounds of the disturbed campground surrounded them. Worried voices, car doors slamming, and in the distance the fading growls of the retreating bear. "Dad," Emily said, her voice small and frightened. "What's going to happen now?" Greg attempted a reassuring smile, though the effect was somewhat diminished by the pain evident on his face. "It's going to be okay, Em. The rangers know what they're doing. They'll make sure the bear is gone, and then we'll figure out our next steps." Sarah nodded, trying to project calm for the children's sake. "That's right. And look, it's almost morning. The sun will be up soon and everything will look better in the daylight." As if on cue, the eastern sky began to lighten, the first pale streaks of dawn breaking through the trees. With the growing light came a flurry of activity. More rangers arrived, cordoning off the Johnsons' campsite and beginning to assess the damage. A paramedic approached, medical kit in hand. "Sir, I'm here to take a look at your arm," he said to Greg. "Can you tell me what happened?" As Greg described the bear's swipe, the paramedic carefully examined the wound. "You're lucky," he said after a moment. "The cuts aren't too deep, but we'll need to clean them thoroughly and bandage them up. There's a risk of infection with animal scratches, so you'll need to get some antibiotics as well." While the paramedic worked on Greg's arm, Ranger Mike returned. "All right, folks, here's the situation," he began. "We've tracked the bear moving away from the campground, but we'll be keeping the area under observation for the next 24 hours at least. Now, about your campsite." He paused, his expression sympathetic. "I'm afraid your tent is a total loss. The bear did quite a number on it. We'll need to document everything for our report. Do you have somewhere else you can stay?" Sarah and Greg exchanged a look. They hadn't planned for this contingency. I'm not sure," Sarah admitted. "We were supposed to be here for 3 more days." Ranger Mike nodded understandingly. "Don't worry, we'll figure something out. There's a lodge not far from here that often helps out in situations like this. Let me make a call and see if they have any vacancies." As the ranger stepped away again, Emily tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Mom," she said, her voice wavering, "can we go home? I don't want to stay here anymore." Sarah pulled her daughter close. "Oh, honey, I know it's scary, but remember how excited you were to see Yosemite. The bear is gone now, and the rangers are here to keep us safe." Max, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly perked up. "Yeah, Em, we can't go home yet. We haven't even seen Old Faithful." Despite the tension, Greg couldn't help but chuckle. "That's in Yellowstone, buddy, but you're right, there's still a lot to see here in Yosemite." Ranger Mike returned, a smile on his face. "Good news, folks. The lodge has a cabin available for the next 3 nights. They're happy to accommodate you at no extra charge, given the circumstances." A wave of relief washed over the family. "Thank you," Greg said sincerely. "We really appreciate all your help," the ranger nodded. "It's all part of the job. Now let's get you folks over to the lodge so you can rest. We'll take care of gathering your belongings and bringing them over once we've finished documenting the site." As they prepared to leave, Sarah noticed Max lingering, staring at the remains of their campsite visible through the trees. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she asked gently. Max looked up at her, his eyes wide. "Mom, is the bear going to be okay? We're not in trouble for spraying it, are we?" Sarah felt a surge of love for her compassionate little boy. "No, honey, we're not in trouble. The spray doesn't hurt the bear permanently. It just scared it away, which is exactly what it's supposed to do." Ranger Mike, overhearing, added, "Your mom's right, little man, that bear will be just fine. In fact, scaring it away like that was the best thing you could have done. It teaches the bear to stay away from people, which is safer for everyone." As they climbed into a ranger's vehicle for the short drive to the lodge, the first full rays of sunlight began to stream through the trees. The forest, which had seemed so menacing in the dark, was transformed into a golden-green wonderland. Emily, gazing out the window, whispered, "It's beautiful." Greg, his arm freshly bandaged, squeezed Sarah's hand. They exchanged a look that spoke volumes, relief at their safety, gratitude for each other, and a shared determination to not let this incident ruin their family adventure. As they drove away from the campground, leaving behind the torn tent and the lingering scent of bear spray, the Johnson family began to realize that their Yosemite story was far from over. It had taken an unexpected turn, but perhaps in the end it would be an adventure they'd never forget, for all the right reasons. The Johnson family settled into their new accommodations at the lodge, a cozy cabin that felt like a fortress compared to their destroyed tent. The events of the early morning had left them all shaken, but the comfort of solid walls and the kindness of the park staff were beginning to ease their frayed nerves. Greg sat on the edge of one of the twin beds, wincing as he tried to find a comfortable position for his injured arm. Sarah busied herself unpacking the few belongings they had managed to salvage from their campsite, while Emily and Max explored the cabin with a mixture of excitement and lingering anxiety. "How are you feeling, honey?" Sarah asked, pausing to look at Greg with concern. Greg attempted a reassuring smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "I'll be okay. The pain meds the paramedic gave me are starting to kick in." Sarah sat down, next to him, gently placing her hand on his uninjured shoulder. "You were so brave, Greg. I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't acted so quickly." Greg shook his head, his expression turning serious. "I froze, Sarah. For a moment there, I didn't know what to do. If you hadn't used that bear spray, hey, Sarah interrupted, her voice firm but kind. We all did what we had to do. We're safe now, and that's what matters. Their conversation was interrupted by Max's excited voice. Mom, Dad, come look. There's a real fireplace in here. Despite their exhaustion, Greg and Sarah couldn't help but smile at their son's enthusiasm. They joined the children in the small, living area where a stone fireplace dominated one wall. Can we light a fire, Dad? Max asked, his eyes shining with hope. Greg hesitated, memories of the campfire from just hours ago flashing through his mind. I'm not sure, buddy. We should probably check with the lodge staff first. Emily, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. I don't want to light a fire, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What if it attracts another bear? The cabin fell silent as the reality of their ordeal settled over them once again. Sarah knelt down next to Emily, pulling her into a gentle hug. Oh, sweetie, we're safe here. The bears can't get into the cabin. Greg nodded, trying to project confidence. Your mom's right, Em. Plus, the rangers are keeping a close eye on the area. We don't have to worry about bears here. Max, sensing his sister's distress, moved closer to her. It's okay, Emily. I'll protect you if any bears come, he declared, puffing out his chest. Despite the tension, Greg and Sarah exchanged a small smile at their son's bravado. Tell you what, Greg said, standing up with a slight groan. Why don't we all try to get some rest? It's been a long night and we could all use some sleep. As if on cue, there was a knock at the cabin door. Sarah went to answer it, finding a park ranger standing outside with a clipboard in hand. Good morning, Mrs. Johnson, the ranger said politely. I'm Ranger Thompson. I hope I'm not disturbing you, but we need to get some statements about the incident for our report. Would now be a good time. Sarah glanced back at her family, seeing the exhaustion etched on their faces. Actually, we were just about to try and get some sleep. Is there any chance we could do this a little later? Ranger Thompson nodded understandingly. Of course, ma'am. How about I come back around 2 p.m.? That should give you all some time to rest. That would be perfect, thank you, Sarah replied gratefully. As she closed the door, Greg was already helping the kids settle into their beds. All right. Troops, he said, trying to keep his voice light. Time for some shut-eye. We've got a busy afternoon ahead of us. Soon, the cabin was quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of breathing as the exhausted family fell into a fitful sleep. Hours later, Greg awoke with a start, his heart racing. For a moment, he was disoriented, expecting to see the walls of their tent. As reality settled in, he took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. Glancing at his watch, he saw it was just past 1 p.m. He carefully got out of bed, trying not to wake Sarah, who was still sleeping soundly beside him. In the small living area, he found Emily and Max already awake, sitting quietly on the couch. Emily was reading a book she had brought along, while Max was fiddling with a small toy car. Hey, kids, Greg said softly, moving to sit in an armchair across from them. How are you both doing? Emily looked up from her book, her eyes still carrying a hint of fear. I had a nightmare about the bear, she admitted quietly. Max nodded vigorously. Me too, but in my dream I turned into a superhero and scared the bear away. Greg couldn't help but chuckle at Max's imagination. Well, you were both pretty brave last night. Superhero brave, I'd say. Emily set her book aside, her expression serious. Dad, are we going to go home now? Greg leaned forward, ignoring the twinge in his shoulder. Do you want to go home, Em? Emily hesitated, glancing at Max before answering. I don't know. I'm scared, but I also don't want to leave. We were supposed to see so many things. Yeah, Max chimed in. We can't go home yet, Dad. We haven't even seen Half Dome. Greg smiled at his children's resilience. Well, how about we talk about it as a family when your mom wakes up? We'll decide together what we want to do next. Just then, Sarah emerged from the bedroom, looking more rested but still concerned. I thought I heard voices. Is everything okay? Greg nodded, standing to give her a gentle hug. We're just talking about what to do next. The kids seem pretty keen on staying. Sarah raised an eyebrow, looking at Emily and Max. Really? Even after? What happened? Emily nodded slowly. I'm still scared, but I also really want to see the waterfalls and everything else we planned. Max jumped up, his earlier energy returning. Yeah, and we can tell everyone at school about how we survived a bear attack. It'll be the coolest story ever." Sarah and Greg exchanged a look, a mix of pride and concern in their eyes. Before they could respond, there was another knock at the door. Greg went to answer it, finding Ranger Thompson outside as promised. "Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson," the ranger said. "I hope you've all had a chance to rest. Would now be a good time to get those statements?" Greg nodded, stepping back to allow the ranger inside. "Yes, come in. We were just discussing our plans for the rest of our stay." As Ranger Thompson entered, notepad in hand, the Johnson family gathered around the small dining table. They were about to relive the events of the night, but as Greg looked at the determined faces of his wife and children, he realized that this ordeal, frightening as it was, had brought them closer together. Whatever they decided to do next, they would face it as a family, stronger and more united than ever before. The bear attack had been a terrifying experience, but it hadn't broken their spirit or their love for the great outdoors. As they began to recount their story to the ranger, Greg felt a surge of pride. They had faced nature at its wildest and come through it together. Now it was time to decide how the rest of their Yosemite adventure would unfold. As the Johnson family recounted their harrowing experience to Ranger Thompson, the atmosphere in the small cabin grew tense. Each family member took turns describing the events of the night, their voices occasionally trembling as they relived the terror of the bear attack. Greg, his injured arm now properly bandaged, began the narrative. "It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard the noise. At first I thought it might just be the wind, but then I heard the fabric of our tent ripping." Sarah nodded, picking up the story. "When Greg woke me up, I could hear heavy breathing outside the tent. That's when we realized it was a bear." Ranger Thompson listened intently, jotting down notes as the family spoke. "And what happened next?" he prompted gently. Emily, her voice barely above a whisper, continued. "The bear's paw came through the tent. I screamed. I couldn't help it." "That's a perfectly natural reaction," the ranger reassured her. "You did nothing wrong." Max, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly piped up. "I yelled at the bear to go away." His voice was a mixture of pride and lingering fear. But then it got really mad and roared really loud. Greg placed a comforting hand on Max's shoulder. "That's when things got really intense. The bear lunged forward, and I tried to reach for the bear spray." Sarah's face paled as she recalled the next moments. It swiped at Greg. "I saw blood and I grabbed the spray and used it." Ranger Thompson nodded solemnly. "You did exactly the right thing, Mrs. Johnson. Using bear spray is the most effective way to deter an attacking bear." As the family finished recounting their story, a heavy silence fell over the cabin. The ranger closed his notebook and looked at each of them in turn. "I want to commend all of you on how you handled this situation. Bear encounters can be extremely dangerous, but you followed the right procedures and worked together as a family. You should be proud of yourselves." Greg and Sarah exchanged a glance, a mix of relief and lingering anxiety in their eyes. "Thank you, Ranger Thompson," Greg said. "We've always tried to be prepared, but nothing could have really prepared us for this." The ranger nodded understandingly. That's often the case with wildlife encounters. Nature can be unpredictable. Now, I have to ask, have you decided on your plans moving forward? The lodge has offered to extend your stay here if you wish to continue your vacation. The family looked at each other, uncertainty evident on their faces. It was Emily who broke the silence. I think I want to stay," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "We came here to see Yosemite, and we haven't really seen anything yet." Max nodded vigorously. "Yeah, we can't let one mean bear ruin our whole trip." Sarah smiled at her children's resilience. "What do you think, Greg? Are you up for continuing?" Greg flexed his injured arm gingerly. "It's sore, but the doctor said it's not serious. I think we should stay. We've come this far, and like Emily said, we haven't really experienced Yosemite yet." Ranger Thompson smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. Yosemite has so much to offer, and it would be a shame for your experience to be defined solely by this incident. If you'd like, I can arrange for a ranger-guided tour of some of the safer areas of the park. It might help you feel more secure as you explore." The family's eyes lit up at this suggestion. "That would be wonderful," Sarah said gratefully. Ranger Thompson prepared to leave. He turned back to the family. One last thing, the bear that attacked your campsite has been located and safely relocated to a more remote area of the park. It won't be coming back to the campgrounds. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. As the ranger left, the Johnsons found themselves alone once again, the weight of their decisions settling over them. "Are we sure about this?" Sarah asked, a hint of worry in her voice. "We could always come back another time." Greg took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I think we need this, honey. If we leave now, the fear might stick with us. But if we stay, if we see the beauty of this place that we came for, maybe we can replace that fear with something better." Emily nodded in agreement. "Dad's right, Mom. I'm still scared, but I also really want to see the waterfalls and the big trees. And now we'll have a ranger with us, so it'll be safer, right?" "Right," Greg confirmed. "Plus, we'll be much more careful now. No food in the tent, no wandering off alone. We'll stick together and follow all the safety guidelines." Max, who had been quiet for a moment, suddenly grinned. "And if we see another bear, we'll just be like, 'No way, bear. We're the Johnsons. And we're not afraid of you anymore.'" The family burst into laughter, the tension of the past hours finally breaking. As their laughter subsided, a new determination seemed to settle over them. "All right then," Sarah said, a smile playing on her lips. "Let's do this. Let's see Yosemite." The rest of the afternoon was spent reorganizing their belongings and making plans for the coming days. They pored over park maps, marking the spots they wanted to visit with their ranger guide. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the cabin windows, the family found themselves gathered around the fireplace, which they had finally decided to light. Greg stood up, wincing slightly as he raised his good arm. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, holding up his cup of hot chocolate. "To the Johnson family, survivors, adventurers, and bear spray champions. To the Johnsons." The rest of the family cheered, clinking their mugs together. As they sat, there the warmth of the fire matching the warmth in their hearts, the terror of the previous night began to fade. In its place grew a sense of excitement for the adventures to come. They had faced nature at its most frightening and had come through it together. Now they were ready to experience nature at its most beautiful. Outside the cabin, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. The day was ending, but for the Johnson family, a new chapter of their Yosemite adventure was just beginning. They had stared fear in the face and chosen to stay, to explore, to embrace the wilderness that had both terrified and awed them. As night fell over Yosemite National Park, the Johnsons drifted off to sleep, dreams of towering sequoias, thundering waterfalls, and majestic granite cliffs filling their minds, the lingering fear of the bear attack slowly giving way to anticipation for the wonders they would soon witness. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the sun's rays filtering through the towering pines surrounding the Johnson family's cabin. Inside, the family stirred awake, a mix of excitement and lingering apprehension coloring their mood. Greg was the first to rise, his injured shoulder stiff but less painful than the day before. He made his way to the small kitchenette, starting a pot of coffee and relishing the normalcy of the morning routine. Sarah joined him soon after, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head on his uninjured shoulder. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. Greg turned, planting a kiss on her forehead. "Better, still sore, but better. How about you, ready for our ranger-guided adventure?" Before Sarah could answer, the patter of feet announced the arrival of Max and Emily. Unlike the subdued children of yesterday, today they seemed charged with energy. "Is it time to go yet?" Max asked, practically bouncing on his toes. "I want to see everything." Emily, though more reserved, couldn't hide her own excitement. "Can we see the giant sequoias first, please?" Sarah laughed, the sound brightening the cabin. "Slow down, you two. We need to have breakfast and meet our ranger guide first. Remember, we're following the rules to the letter this time." As the family sat down to a breakfast of instant oatmeal and fruit, a knock at the door signaled the arrival of their guide for the day. Greg opened the door to find a smiling woman in a ranger uniform. "Good morning. I'm Ranger Lisa," she said cheerfully. "I hear you folks are ready for a proper Yosemite adventure." The family welcomed her in, and soon they were gathered around the small table, mapping out their day. Ranger Lisa spread out a detailed park map, pointing out various landmarks and trails. Given recent events, she said, her tone gentle but matter-of-fact, I thought we'd start with some of the more developed areas of the park. We'll still see plenty of natural wonders, but we'll be keeping a safe distance from the deeper wilderness. For now. Greg and Sarah nodded appreciatively, while Emily leaned in, studying the map intently. Max, however, couldn't contain his curiosity. But what if we see another bear? He blurted out. Will you use your ranger powers to talk to it? Ranger. Lisa chuckled. I'm afraid I don't have any special bear-talking powers, Max. But I do have lots of experience with wildlife, and I know how to keep us safe. The most important thing is to stay together and make plenty of noise as we walk. Bears usually prefer to avoid humans if they hear us coming. With the plan set, the family gathered their day packs, double-checking that all food and scented items were properly stored in bear-proof containers. As they set out from the cabin, the fresh mountain air seemed to invigorate them all. Their first stop was Yosemite Valley, where they stood in awe of the massive granite cliffs of El Capitan and Half Dome. Ranger Lisa pointed out climbers on the face of El Capitan, tiny specks against the enormous rock face. Wow, Emily breathed, her fear momentarily forgotten as she gazed upward. They look so small up there. It's like they're climbing to the sky, Max added, his eyes wide with wonder. As they continued their walk, Ranger Lisa kept up a steady stream of information about the park's geology, wildlife, and history. She was careful to address the bear issue directly, answering the family's questions patiently and thoroughly. Remember, she said as they paused by the Merced River, its clear waters reflecting the blue sky above. Bears are naturally afraid of humans. What happened to you was extremely rare. By following proper food storage and making noise as we hike, we're doing everything we can to prevent another encounter. The family nodded, absorbing her words. As they watched a pair of deer grazing peacefully nearby, the tension that had gripped them since the attack began to ease. Their next stop was a sequoia grove, where the massive trees towered above them, their reddish bark glowing in the dappled sunlight. Emily, who had been quiet for much of the morning, suddenly came alive, peppering Ranger Lisa with questions about the ancient giants. How old is this tree? She asked, placing her hand on the rough bark of a particularly large sequoia. This one is probably around 2,000 years old, Ranger Lisa replied. It was already a seedling when the Roman Empire was at its height. Max's eyes grew round. You mean it was alive when the dinosaurs were here? The adults chuckled. Not quite. That old buddy, Greg said, ruffling Max's hair, but pretty close, right? As the day wore on, the family's confidence grew. They hiked to a spectacular waterfall, the mist cooling their faces as they stood on the viewing platform. They spotted colorful wildflowers in a meadow, and even caught a glimpse of a black bear in the far distance, safely observed through Ranger Lisa's binoculars. See? Ranger Lisa said, as they watched the bear amble away, uninterested in the humans. That's how most bear encounters go. They see us, we see them, and we both go our separate ways. By late afternoon, as they made their way back to the cabin, the Johnsons were tired but exhilarated. The fear that had clouded their trip had been replaced by a sense of wonder and accomplishment. I can't believe how much we saw today, Sarah said, her arm linked with Greg's as they walked. Greg nodded, a contented smile on his face. It's like a whole different world out here. I'm glad we decided to stay. As they approached their cabin, Ranger Lisa turned to the family. You all did great today. How are you feeling about continuing on your own tomorrow? The family exchanged glances. It was Emily who spoke up first. I think we'll be okay. Right, guys? Max nodded vigorously. Yeah, we're bear experts now. Sarah laughed, pulling Max close. I wouldn't go that far, but I do feel much more confident. Thank you, Ranger Lisa. You've helped us see Yosemite the way we'd hoped to. As they said their goodbyes to Ranger Lisa and entered their cabin, the family felt a sense of transformation. They had faced their fears, learned valuable lessons, and rediscovered the beauty and majesty of nature. That night, as they sat around the cabin's small fireplace, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows, carefully with all doors and windows securely closed, the bear attack felt like a distant memory. In its place were new memories of towering trees, thundering waterfalls, and the shared joy of exploration. Greg raised his mug of hot chocolate. To Yosemite, he said, and to us. We came, we saw, we conquered our fears. To Yosemite. The Yu family echoed, their voices filled with warmth and newfound confidence. Outside, the stars twinkled brightly in the clear mountain sky, a glittering canopy over the vast wilderness. The Johnson family's Yosemite adventure had taken an unexpected turn, but as they drifted off to sleep that night, they knew that the best was yet to come. They had not only survived a bear encounter, but had also discovered a deeper appreciation for the wild beauty of the natural world and for their own resilience as a family. The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows, casting a warm glow over the Johnson family as they prepared for their final day in Yosemite. The air was filled with a mixture of excitement and a touch of sadness that their adventure was coming to an end. Greg, his injured arm now feeling much better, was packing their day packs for one last hike. Sarah stood at the small kitchenette, preparing sandwiches for their picnic lunch. Emily and Max sat at the table poring over a park map, eagerly discussing which trail they wanted to tackle. "How about this one, Dad?" Max pointed to a winding trail on the map. "It goes up to a place called Glacier Point. Ranger Lisa said it has the best view in the whole park." Greg leaned over to look at the map, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "That's a pretty challenging hike, buddy. I'm not sure if we're up for that level just yet." Emily, sensing her brother's disappointment, quickly chimed in. "What about this one? It goes to a place called Mirror Lake. It says it's an easy trail, and we might see some wildlife." Sarah joined them at the table, setting down a plate of fruit. "Mirror Lake sounds perfect. What do you think, Greg?" Greg nodded, a smile replacing his frown. "Good choice, Em. It's not too far, and we'll have plenty of time to enjoy the scenery without rushing." As they finished their breakfast and final preparations, there was a knock at the door. Sarah opened it to find Ranger Thompson standing outside. "Good morning, Johnsons," he said with a friendly smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I just wanted to check in and see how you're all doing after yesterday's guided tour." The family invited him in, and soon they were all seated in the small living area, sharing their experiences from the previous day. "It was amazing," Max exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. "We saw huge waterfalls and giant trees and even a bear, but from really far away this time." Ranger Thompson chuckled. "I'm glad to hear it. Ranger Lisa mentioned how well you all did. She was impressed by your questions and your eagerness to learn." Emily, who had been quiet, spoke up. "I was scared at first," she admitted. "But Ranger Lisa helped me understand the bears better. They're not just scary monsters. They're part of nature like everything else here." The ranger nodded approvingly. "That's exactly right, Emily. Understanding and respecting wildlife is a big part of enjoying places like Yosemite safely." Greg and Sarah exchanged a proud glance, touched by their children's growth over the past few days. "So what's your plan for today?" Ranger Thompson asked. "We're thinking of hiking to Mirror Lake," Greg replied. "It seems like a good final adventure. Before we head home tomorrow." The ranger nodded. "Excellent choice. The reflections of the surrounding cliffs on the lake's surface are stunning. Just remember to keep making noise as you hike and stick together." As Ranger Thompson prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "You know, what happened to you folks is pretty rare, but the way you've handled it, staying, learning, embracing the park despite your fear, that's really commendable. You've turned a frightening experience into a positive one, and that's something special." His words left the family feeling proud and accomplished as they set out on their hike. The trail to Mirror Lake was indeed easy, winding through fragrant pine forests and alongside a burbling stream. As they walked, they put into practice everything they had learned, making noise by singing silly hiking songs and keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. About halfway to the lake, they paused in a sunny clearing for a water break. As they rested, a rustling in the nearby bushes caught their attention. For a moment, tension filled the air, memories of the bear attack flashing through their minds. But instead of a bear, a young deer stepped out into the clearing, its large ears twitching. As it regarded the family curiously. "Oh, wow," Emily whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. The deer, seemingly unbothered by their presence, began to graze on the lush grass. The family watched in awe, hardly daring to breathe. After a few minutes, the deer looked up, flicked its tail, and bounded back into the forest. That was so cool, Max said, his voice filled with excitement but still kept low. It wasn't scared of us at all. Sarah smiled, putting her arm around Max's shoulders. That's because we were quiet and respectful of its space. We're guests in their home, remember? The encounter with the deer seemed to energize the family, and they continued their hike with renewed enthusiasm. When they finally reached Mirror Lake, the view took their breath away. The still water perfectly reflected the towering cliffs and blue sky above, creating a mirror image that seemed to double the beauty of the landscape. They found a quiet spot by the shore for their picnic lunch, savoring their sandwiches as they took in the magnificent scenery. You know, Greg said, breaking the comfortable silence, when that bear attacked our tent, I thought our trip was ruined. I was ready to pack up and go home right then and there. Sarah reached out and squeezed his hand. I'm glad we didn't, she said softly. Emily nodded in agreement. Me too, I was so scared, but now I don't want to leave. Yeah, Max chimed in. Can we come back next year? Maybe we can stay for 2 weeks instead of 1. The adults laughed at his enthusiasm. We'll see, buddy, Greg said, ruffling Max's hair. But I think it's safe to say that Yosemite hasn't seen the last of the Johnsons. As they packed up their picnic and prepared for the hike back, each member of the family took a moment to soak in the beauty around them. The fear and trauma of the bear attack had been replaced by a deep appreciation for the wilderness and a stronger bond as a family. On the trail back to their cabin, they encountered other hikers and exchanged friendly greetings. Greg and Sarah noticed with pride how confidently Emily and Max moved on the trail, pointing out interesting plants and keeping an eye out for wildlife, from a safe distance, of course, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The Johnson family returned to their cabin. They were tired but happy, their hearts full of the day's experiences and the memories they had made throughout their trip. That night, as they sat around the fireplace one last time, Greg raised his mug of hot chocolate. To Yosemite, he said, his voice filled with emotion. To facing our fears, to new adventures, and to our incredible family. To Yosemite, they all echoed, clinking their mugs together. Outside, the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, a final, sparkling farewell to the Johnson family. Their Yosemite adventure had been far from what they had originally planned, but as they drifted off to sleep that night, they all agreed it had been even better than they could have imagined. They had not just survived a bear attack. They had discovered a new side of themselves and a deeper connection to the natural world, and that, they realized, was the greatest adventure of all. The morning of their departure dawned crisp and clear, a perfect Yosemite day that seemed to be bidding the Johnson family a fond farewell. As they packed up their belongings in the cozy cabin that had been their refuge, a mixture of emotions hung in the air. Relief at returning to the familiar comforts of home, sadness at leaving the majestic beauty of the park, and a newfound confidence in their ability to face challenges together. Greg winced slightly as he lifted his duffel bag, his injured arm still tender but healing well. Sarah noticed and moved to help him, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange of support and shared experience. "Dad, can we stop by the visitor center before we leave?" Max asked, his voice muffled as he rummaged through his backpack, making sure he hadn't forgotten any of his newfound treasures: pine cones, interesting rocks, and a junior ranger badge he'd earned during their stay. "That's a great idea, Max," Greg replied, ruffling his son's hair. "We should say goodbye to Ranger Thompson and Ranger Lisa if they're there. Plus, I think we owe them a proper thank you for all their help." Emily, who had been quiet as she carefully folded her clothes, looked up. "Can we also get some postcards? I want to send one to Grandma and Grandpa. They'll never believe what happened to us." Sarah chuckled, zipping up her suitcase. "I'm not sure they will, even with photographic evidence. But postcards are a wonderful idea, Em." As they loaded their luggage into the SUV, the family took a moment to stand together, gazing at the breathtaking view of Yosemite Valley spread out before them. The morning sun glinted off the granite faces of El Capitan and Half Dome, and a light mist rose from the distant waterfalls. "It's so beautiful," Emily murmured, her voice tinged with awe. "I can't believe I was scared to stay here after—" "You know," Greg put his arm around her shoulders. "It's okay to have been scared, Em, we all were. But look at us now. We faced our fears and got to experience all this beauty." Yeah, Max chimed in, puffing out his chest. We're like bear attack. Survivors now, we're practically famous. The family laughed, the sound echoing in the crisp mountain air. As they piled into the car and began the drive to the visitor center, they found themselves reminiscing about the events of the past few days. Remember how you used that bear spray, Mom? Max said, bouncing in his seat with excitement. You were like a superhero. Sarah blushed slightly but couldn't hide her proud smile. I was just acting on instinct. We all did what we had to do to keep each other safe. As they pulled into the parking lot of the visitor center, they spotted Ranger Thompson chatting with a group of tourists near the entrance. He waved as he saw the Johnsons approach, excusing himself from the group to greet them. Well, if it isn't our intrepid adventurers, he said warmly. Heading home today? Greg nodded, shaking the ranger's hand. We are. We wanted to stop by and thank you and Ranger Lisa for everything you've done for us. Is she around? I'm afraid Lisa's out. On a trail guide today, but I'll be sure to pass along your thanks, Ranger Thompson replied. So, how do you feel about Yosemite now after everything that's happened? The family exchanged glances, and it was Emily who spoke up. It's amazing, she said, her voice filled with genuine enthusiasm. I was so scared after the bear attack, but now, I don't want to leave. There's so much to see and learn about. Ranger Thompson beamed. That's wonderful to hear, Emily. You know, many people might have packed up and left after an experience like yours. The fact that you stayed, learned, and grew to appreciate the park even more, well, that's really special. As they chatted with Ranger Thompson, sharing stories from their adventures over the past few days, a small crowd of tourists gathered nearby, listening with interest. Excuse me, one woman said, stepping forward. Did I hear correctly that you had a bear encounter? Greg nodded, suddenly aware of the attention they were attracting. We did, yes. It was a frightening experience. But thanks to the park rangers and the safety measures we learned, we were able to handle it and even continue our vacation. The woman's eyes widened. That's incredible. Would you mind sharing your story? We're new to camping and I think we could learn a lot from your experience. Greg looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. For the next 20 minutes, the Johnsons found themselves the center of attention as they recounted their bear encounter and the lessons they'd learned. They emphasized the importance of proper food storage, making noise while hiking, and respecting wildlife from a distance. As they finished their impromptu presentation, the small crowd applauded, and several people came forward to ask questions and thank them for sharing their experience. You see, Ranger Thompson said quietly to Greg and Sarah as the crowd dispersed, your story is helping others stay safe and appreciate the park. That's turning a negative experience into a really positive one. Feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment, the family made their way into the visitor center. They picked out postcards, with Emily carefully selecting ones that showcased the beauty of Yosemite. Max, true to form, chose the most dramatic shots of bears he could find. As they prepared to leave, Ranger Thompson handed them a package. A little goodbye gift from all of us here at Yosemite, he said with a smile. Inside they found a book about Yosemite's wildlife, a set of high-quality prints showcasing the park's landscapes, and a handwritten note thanking them for their bravery and positive attitude. With final hugs and promises to return, the Johnson family climbed back into their SUV, ready to begin the journey home. As they drove through the park gates, they fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts about the incredible adventure they'd shared. It was Max who finally broke the silence. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious, "can we come back next year? I want to learn more about the bears and all the other animals. Maybe I can be a junior ranger again." Greg and Sarah exchanged a glance in the rearview mirror, smiling at their son's enthusiasm. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Max," Sarah replied. "What do you think, Emily?" Emily nodded, a bright smile on her face. "Definitely. But next time, let's try to meet the bears from a safer distance, okay?" The family laughed, the sound filling the car with joy and a sense of shared adventure. As Yosemite faded in their rearview mirror, they knew they were leaving with much, more than they had arrived with. Not just souvenirs and postcards, but a deeper appreciation for nature, a stronger bond as a family, and the knowledge that they could face any challenge together. The bear attack that had nearly derailed their Vacation had instead become the catalyst for an unforgettable journey of growth and discovery. As they headed home to Sacramento, the Johnsons were already looking forward to their next adventure in the wild beauty of Yosemite. Weeks had passed since the Johnson family's eventful trip to Yosemite, and life in Sacramento had largely returned to its normal rhythm. The physical reminders of their adventure were fading. Greg's arm was almost fully healed, with only a faint scar remaining as evidence of the bear's swipe. But the emotional impact of their experience lingered, coloring their daily lives in unexpected ways. One sunny Saturday morning, Greg found himself standing in the backyard, sipping coffee and staring thoughtfully at the fence line. Sarah joined him, wrapping an arm around his waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, noticing his pensive expression. Greg smiled, pulling her closer. "Just thinking about how different everything feels now. It's like Yosemite changed us, you know?" Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. "I know what you mean. I catch myself looking at things differently, appreciating the little bits of nature we have here in the city." Their conversation was interrupted by Max bursting out of the back door, waving a piece of paper excitedly. "Mom! Dad! Look what I did in school yesterday." The parents turned their attention to their energetic son, who proudly displayed a colorful drawing. It showed a family, clearly meant to be the Johnsons, standing bravely in front of a comically large bear. "That's us in Yosemite," Max exclaimed. "My teacher said it was the most exciting what I did this summer project in the whole class." Greg chuckled, ruffling Max's hair. "It's great, buddy. But remember, we don't want to make the bear seem too scary. Remember what Ranger Lisa taught us?" Max nodded solemnly. "Bears are just animals trying to survive, not monsters. We have to respect them and their home." "That's right," Sarah said, impressed by her son's recall. "And what else do we remember about staying safe in bear country?" "Store food properly, make noise while hiking, and always stay together," Max recited proudly. Just then, Emily emerged from the house, her nose buried in a book about wildlife conservation. She'd developed a keen interest in environmental issues since their return from Yosemite. "Hey, Em," Greg called out. "What are you reading about now?" Emily looked up, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "It's about how national parks help protect endangered species. Did you know that some of the animals we saw in Yosemite are threatened by climate change?" Sarah smiled at her daughter's newfound passion. "Maybe you'll work in a national park someday, helping to protect those animals." Emily's face lit up at the idea. "That would be amazing. Do you think we could volunteer at a local wildlife center or something? I want to learn more." Greg and Sarah exchanged a proud glance. Their children's growth since the Yosemite trip was remarkable. As the family settled around the patio table for breakfast, the conversation naturally drifted back to their adventure. They'd told the story countless times to friends, family, and colleagues, but among themselves, they often reflected on the deeper impact of their experience. "You know," Greg said, spreading jam on his toast, "I've been thinking about how that bear encounter changed us. At first I thought it had ruined our trip, but now I see it differently." Sarah nodded, understanding. "It's like it woke us up, in a way, made us more aware of the world around us, and more aware of each other," Emily added thoughtfully. "Remember how we all worked together when the bear attacked? We're a pretty good team." Max, mouth full of cereal, mumbled his agreement. After swallowing, he asked, "Can we go camping again soon? I promise I won't bring any beef jerky this time." The family laughed, the sound carrying across the backyard. It was a far cry from the tense, fearful atmosphere that had surrounded them in the immediate aftermath of the bear attack. "Actually," Greg said, a twinkle in his eye, "I've been thinking about that. How would you all feel about a camping trip to the Sierra Nevada next month? We could put all our new outdoor skills to the test." The children's eyes lit up with excitement, but Sarah looked a bit apprehensive. "Are you sure we're ready for that?" she asked quietly. Greg took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I think we are. We learned so much in Yosemite, not just about outdoor safety, but about ourselves. We're stronger now, more prepared." Emily nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, Mom. And we'll be super careful. I've been reading all about proper camping techniques. And I'll help keep watch for bears," Max added, puffing out his chest. Sarah looked at her family's eager faces, and felt her apprehension melt away. "All right," she said with a smile. "Let's do it. But we're going to prepare thoroughly, okay? No shortcuts on safety." As Greg went inside to start researching camping spots, and the kids chattered excitedly about what they wanted to bring, Sarah found herself reflecting on how far they'd come. The bear attack, terrifying as it had been, had sparked a transformation in their family. They'd discovered a resilience they didn't know they had, a deeper appreciation for nature, and a stronger bond with each other. Later that evening, as the sun set over Sacramento, casting a warm glow across their backyard, the Johnson family sat together on their patio. The conversation flowed easily, jumping from school projects to work anecdotes to plans for their upcoming camping trip. There was an ease and closeness between them that felt new and precious. Greg, looking at his family, felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. "You know," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm really proud of us. What happened in Yosemite, it could have broken us. But look at us now." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "We're stronger," she said softly. "Braver. And we're bear experts," Max chimed in, causing everyone to laugh. Emily, who had been quiet, spoke up. I think that bear taught us something important, about respect and courage and how small we are in the big world, but also about how strong we can be when we stick together." A thoughtful silence fell over the family as they absorbed Emily's words. The distant sound of city traffic mingled, with the chirping of birds settling down for the night, a reminder of the intersection between their urban life and the wild nature they'd encountered. As stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Greg raised his glass of lemonade. "To the bear," he said with a smile, "and to us." "To the bear and to us," the family echoed, clinking their glasses together. The bear that had torn into their tent that night in Yosemite was long gone, relocated to a more remote part of the park. But its impact remained, having torn away not just canvas, but the complacency and disconnect that had subtly separated the Johnsons from each other and from the natural world. In its place, it had left something precious, a newfound respect for nature, a deeper family bond, and an awakened sense of adventure. As the Johnson family sat together under the Sacramento sky, they were already dreaming of their next journey into the wilderness. The fear that had once clouded their memories of Yosemite had transformed into excitement for future explorations. They had entered the park as casual tourists and emerged as a stronger, more connected family, with a deep appreciation for the wild beauty of the world around them. The bear attack, once a nightmare, had become the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one filled with respect for nature, love for each other, and the courage to embrace whatever adventures lay ahead. Now let's go to the next attack case. If you're enjoying it, leave a like and a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Let's move on to the next one. Chapter 1. The Morning Run. The persistent beep of her alarm clock pulled Emily Carter from her dreams. She groaned, her hand fumbling in the darkness to silence the incessant noise. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through her curtains, she glanced at the glowing numbers. 5:45 a.m. With a sigh, she pushed herself up, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. "Another day, another run," Emily muttered to herself, her bare feet touching the cool wooden floor. She padded across her small bedroom to the window, pulling back the curtains. The Alaskan landscape greeted her, a world still cloaked in the soft blue hues of pre-dawn. The silhouettes of spruce trees stood like sentinels against the slowly lightening sky. In the distance, the snow-capped peaks of the Alaska Range were just becoming visible, a reminder of the wild beauty that surrounded her rural home outside Fairbanks. Emily stretched, feeling the familiar pull in her muscles. At 29, she prided herself on maintaining an active lifestyle, especially given the demands of her job as a nurse at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. These morning runs were her sanctuary, a time to clear her head before diving into the often chaotic world of the emergency room. She made her way to the kitchen, the old floorboards creaking under her weight. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the air with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. As she waited, Emily leaned against the counter, her mind drifting to the day ahead. "Let's see," she murmured, mentally ticking off her to-do list. "Run, shower, work at 9, then groceries on the way home." She poured herself a small cup of coffee, savoring the warmth and caffeine. Maybe I'll call Mom tonight if I'm not too wiped. Finishing her coffee, Emily returned to her bedroom to change. She pulled on her favorite running tights, a long-sleeved thermal shirt, and a lightweight jacket. As she laced up her well-worn running shoes, a familiar excitement began to build. Despite the early hour and the chill in the air, there was something magical about running as the world woke up around her. Emily grabbed her phone, checking the weather app out of habit. The screen glowed in the dim room. 38 degrees Fahrenheit, clear skies. Perfect running weather, she thought with a smile. She slipped the phone into the armband, adjusted her ponytail, and headed for the door. As she stepped onto her porch, the crisp autumn air hit her lungs, sending a shiver down her spine. Emily took a deep breath, relishing the clean, pine-scented air. The world was quiet, save for the distant call of a raven and the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. "Okay, Emily," she said to herself, beginning her warm-up stretches. 6 miles today, let's do this. She bounced on her toes, shaking out her arms and legs. As she did so, her hand brushed against the small canister attached to her belt. Bear spray. A gift from her father when she'd first moved to Alaska 3 years ago. She'd never had to use it, but it was a comforting presence on her runs. Better safe than sorry, her father's voice echoed in her head. Stretches complete, Emily stepped off her porch and onto the gravel driveway. Her watch beeped as she started the timer. 6:30 a.m., right on schedule. She began with a light jog, her feet crunching on the gravel as she made her way towards the trailhead at the end of her driveway. The trail was a familiar friend, winding through the boreal forest that surrounded her home. As she jogged, the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the trees, casting long shadows across her path. The forest was coming alive around her. A red squirrel chattered angrily as she passed, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the distinctive call of a moose. Emily settled into her rhythm, her breath coming in measured pants. Her mind wandered as her feet carried her along the well-worn path. She thought about her patients at the hospital, about the phone call she needed to make to her mother, about the grocery list waiting on her fridge. As she rounded a bend in the trail, a flash of movement caught her eye. She slowed her pace, squinting into the underbrush. A snowshoe hare darted across the path, its coat a mottled blend of brown and white as it transitioned for the coming winter. "Hey there, little guy," Emily said softly, smiling at the creature's antics. The hare paused, its nose twitching before disappearing into the brush. Emily checked her watch. 2 miles down, 4 to go. She picked up her pace, feeling strong and energized. The trail began a gradual incline, weaving between towering spruce, trees and clusters of birch, their leaves a breathtaking palette of gold and crimson. As she crested the hill, Emily paused for a moment, taking in the view. From this vantage point, she could see for miles. The sun was now fully above the horizon, bathing the landscape in a warm golden light. In the valley below, a light mist hung over a small lake, giving the scene an almost ethereal quality. "God, I love this place," Emily breathed, a sense of awe washing over her. It was moments like these that reminded her why she'd chosen to make Alaska her home. Checking her watch again, Emily realized she'd been standing still for several minutes. "Oops," she chuckled to herself. "Better get moving if I want to make it to work on time." She started back down the trail, her legs easily falling back into their rhythm. As she ran, Emily found herself reflecting on her life in Alaska. It hadn't been an easy decision to move here after finishing nursing school. Her family and friends back in Oregon had thought she was crazy, taking a job in what they saw as the middle of nowhere. But Emily had fallen in love with Alaska during a summer internship, captivated by its wild beauty and the sense of adventure. That seemed to permeate every aspect of life here. Sure, the winters were long and dark, and yes, she sometimes missed the conveniences of city life. But mornings like this, with the world quiet and vast around her, made it all worthwhile. Lost in her thoughts, Emily almost missed the sound. A rustling in the underbrush, louder than the small animals she was used to encountering. She slowed, her pace suddenly alert, her eyes scanning the forest around her. "Hello?" she called out, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet morning. There was no response, just another rustle, closer this time. Emily's hand instinctively went to the bear spray on her belt. Her heart began to race, and not from the exertion of her run. She remembered the safety tips she'd learned when she first moved here. Make noise, make yourself big, slowly back away. "Hey, bear," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just passing through." The forest fell silent. Emily stood still, straining her ears for any sound, her eyes darting from tree to tree. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute, she heard another rustle, this time moving away from the trail. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Probably just a moose," she muttered, trying to convince herself. Still, her heart hammered in her chest, the adrenaline making her hands shake slightly. She looked at her watch, 7:15 a.m. She'd been out for 45 minutes already. "Maybe I'll cut this one short today," she decided, still eyeing the forest warily as Emily turned to head back home. She couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming earlier, now felt oppressive and full of hidden dangers. She picked up her pace, no longer the easy jog of her usual run, but a faster clip born of nervous energy. The sun climbed higher in the sky as Emily made her way back along the trail. By the time she reached her driveway, her shirt was damp with sweat, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She slowed to a walk, trying to calm her racing heart. As she approached her house, Emily glanced back at the forest. In the full light of day, it looked as peaceful and beautiful as ever. She shook her head, feeling a bit foolish for her panic. "Get it together, Carter," she chided herself. "You've been doing this run for 3 years, nothing's changed." Still, as she climbed the steps to her porch, Emily couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was different. She paused at her door, looking back at the trailhead one last time. "See you tomorrow," she said softly, more to herself than to the forest. Then she went inside, closing the door firmly behind her, ready to start another day in the last frontier. Chapter 2. The trail. Emily stepped out of her house the next morning, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp Alaskan air. The events of yesterday's run still lingered in her mind, but the familiar routine of her morning jog beckoned. She glanced at her watch. 6:25 a.m. The sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading as dawn approached. "All right, Emily," she murmured. To herself, "Let's try this again." She began her warm-up stretches, paying extra attention to her calves and hamstrings. As she moved, her hand brushed against the bear spray canister on her belt. She'd made sure it was fully charged before heading out, a precaution she'd always taken but now felt more necessary than ever. The gravel crunched under her feet as she started down her driveway towards the trailhead. The forest loomed ahead, a mix of spruce and birch trees standing tall against the slowly brightening sky. Emily took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and damp earth. As she reached the trailhead, she paused for a moment. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly before her, the trail disappearing into the shadows between the trees. Emily shook off her hesitation and started her run, her feet finding their rhythm on the familiar path. The trail wound through the dense forest, occasionally opening up to reveal breathtaking views of the surrounding landscape. Emily's earlier unease began to fade as she settled into her pace, her body warming up despite the cool morning air. About a mile into her run, Emily rounded a bend and came upon a small clearing. The early morning light filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. A group of fireweed, their vibrant pink blossoms a stark contrast to the greens and browns of the forest, swayed gently in the breeze. Emily slowed to a walk, taking in the beauty of the scene. She pulled out her phone and snapped a quick picture, making a mental note to share it with her mother later. "See, Mum?" she said aloud, imagining the conversation. "This is why I love it here." As she put her phone away and prepared to resume her run, a flash of movement caught her eye. On the far side of the clearing, a snowshoe hare hopped into view. Its coat was a mottled brown, not yet fully transitioned to its winter white. The hare paused, its nose twitching as it sensed Emily's presence. Emily stood perfectly still, not wanting to startle the creature. For a moment they regarded each other across the clearing, woman and hare, two inhabitants of this vast wilderness. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, the hare darted back into the underbrush. Smiling to herself, Emily started running again, The trail narrowed as it led her deeper into the forest. The trees here were older, their trunks thick and gnarled, their branches forming a dense canopy overhead. Shafts of sunlight broke through in places, illuminating patches of moss and lichen on the forest floor. As she ran, Emily's mind wandered to the day ahead. She had a shift at the hospital starting at noon, and she mentally reviewed the patients she'd be checking on. There was Mr. Johnson, recovering from hip surgery, and Mrs. Patel, who was due to be discharged today. She made a note to double-check Mrs. Patel's medication list before she left. Lost in thought, Emily almost missed the fallen tree blocking the path ahead. She slowed to a stop, considering her options. The tree was too large to easily climb over, its trunk nearly as tall as she was. "Well, this is new," she muttered, hands on her hips as she surveyed the obstacle. She glanced to either side of the trail. To the left, the underbrush was too thick to easily pass through. To the right, however, there seemed to be a bit of a clearing. Emily decided to go that way, stepping carefully over exposed roots and fallen branches. As she made her way around the fallen tree, Emily couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. She was off the main trail now, in a part of the forest she didn't know as well. The trees seemed to press in closer here, the shadows deeper. "It's fine," she reassured herself. "Just a little detour. You'll be back on the trail in no time." But as she continued on, trying to parallel the main trail, Emily realized she was having trouble getting her bearings. The forest looked the same in every direction: endless trees, dappled sunlight, and the soft carpet of fallen leaves underfoot. Emily stopped, taking a deep breath to calm her rising panic. She turned in a slow circle, trying to spot any landmark that might help her orient herself. Nothing looked familiar. "Okay, don't freak out," she said aloud, her voice sounding small in the vastness of the forest. "You've got your phone. Worst case scenario, you can call for help." She pulled out her phone, relieved to see she still had signal. She opened her GPS app, waiting for it to locate her position. The seconds ticked by agonizingly slowly as the app searched for a signal. Finally, a blue dot appeared on the screen. Emily zoomed out, trying to get her bearings. According to the map, she wasn't far from the main trail, maybe a quarter-mile to the east. "All right, east it is," she decided, using the sun's position to guide her. Emily set off, moving more slowly, now careful to watch her footing on the uneven forest floor. She kept her phone out, periodically checking to make sure she was still heading in the right direction. As she walked, the forest around her seemed to come alive with sound. Birds called to each other in the canopy above, their songs echoing through the trees. A woodpecker's rapid-fire tapping echoed in the distance, and underneath it all, the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle morning breeze. After about 10 minutes of careful navigation, Emily spotted a break in the trees ahead. She quickened her pace, relief flooding through her as she recognized the main trail. "Thank God," she breathed, stepping back onto the familiar path. She checked her watch, surprised to see that nearly an hour had passed since she'd started her run. The detour had taken longer than she'd realized. So much for a quick morning jog. Emily chuckled to herself, shaking her head. Despite the unexpected adventure, Emily felt invigorated. There was something thrilling about finding her way back, about navigating the wilderness on her own. It was one of the things she loved about living in Alaska, the constant reminder of nature's power and her own resilience in the face of it. As she turned to head back home, a movement in her peripheral vision made her freeze. She turned her head slowly, her heart rate picking up as she scanned the forest edge. There, partially hidden behind a large spruce, was a bear. It was hard to gauge its size from this distance, but Emily could tell it was a brown bear, its fur a rich chocolate color in the morning light. Time seemed to stand still as Emily and the bear regarded each other. The bear's nose twitched, likely catching Emily's scent on the breeze. Emily's hand instinctively went to the bear spray on her belt, but she didn't remove it yet. "Hey, bear," she called out, trying to keep her voice calm and steady. "I see you. There, I'm just passing through, okay?" The bear tilted its head, seeming almost curious. It took a step forward, emerging fully from behind the tree. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she realized just how large the animal was. Standing on all fours, its shoulder was likely as high as Emily's chest. Emily slowly began to back away, keeping her eyes on the bear, but avoiding direct eye contact. "That's right. I'm just leaving," she continued, her voice shaking slightly, despite her efforts to stay calm. "No need to worry about me." The bear watched her for a moment longer, then turned and ambled back into the forest, disappearing as quietly as it had appeared. Emily stood rooted to the spot for several long moments, her heart pounding in her chest. When she was sure the bear was gone, she let out a shaky breath. "Holy shit," she whispered, her legs suddenly feeling weak. She glanced at her watch again, 7:45 a.m. She'd been out for well over an hour now, much longer than her usual run. With a start, she realized she needed to head back if she was going, to make it to her shift on time. As Emily jogged back along the trail towards home, her mind raced. The encounter with the bear had been both terrifying and exhilarating. It was a stark reminder of the wild nature of her adopted home, of the thin line between civilization and wilderness that she straddled every day. By the time she reached her driveway, the sun was fully up, bathing the world in golden morning light. Emily slowed to a walk, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was exhausted, but also oddly energized. As she climbed the steps to her porch, Emily turned and looked back at the trail. The forest stood silent and seemingly peaceful, giving no hint of the adventures and dangers it held. "What a morning," Emily murmured, shaking her head in disbelief. She went inside, her mind already turning to her upcoming shift at the hospital. But as she showered and prepared for the day ahead, Emily knew one thing for certain. Her morning runs would never feel quite the same again. Chapter 3. The Encounter. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the Alaskan sky a palette of pinks and oranges, as Emily Carter stepped out onto her porch. She inhaled deeply, the cold air sharp in her lungs, and glanced at her watch. 6:15 a.m. Earlier than usual, but after yesterday's extended adventure, she wanted to ensure she had plenty of time for her run before her shift at the hospital. She began her warm-up stretches. Emily's mind wandered to the events of the previous day. The bear encounter had left her shaken, but also exhilarated. It was a reminder of the wild beauty that had drawn her to Alaska in the first place. "All right, Emily," she muttered to herself as she finished her stretches. "Stay alert today, no more detours." She double-checked her bear spray, ensuring it was securely fastened to her belt, and set off down her gravel driveway towards the trailhead. The forest loomed ahead, a mix of spruce and birch trees standing tall against the slowly brightening sky. As she reached the trail, Emily paused for a moment, taking in the quiet beauty of the morning. The trail wound through the dense forest, occasionally opening up to reveal breathtaking views of the surrounding landscape. Emily settled into her familiar rhythm, her feet pounding a steady beat on the packed earth. The crisp air filled her lungs, invigorating her as she ran. About a mile into her run, Emily rounded a bend in the trail. The path straightened out before her, disappearing into the distance between the trees. She was just about to pick up her pace when something caught her eye. 30 yards ahead, a massive brown bear stood in the middle of the trail. Emily froze, her heart suddenly pounding in her ears. The bear's head snapped up, its nostrils flaring, as it caught her scent. Time seemed to stand still as they regarded each other across the distance. In that moment, Emily's mind raced through everything she knew about bear encounters. Don't run. Make yourself big. Slowly back away. She took a deep, shaky breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "Hey, bear," she called out, her voice trembling slightly, despite her efforts to sound calm. "I see you there. I'm just passing through, okay?" The bear's ears twitched at the sound of her voice. It rose up on its hind legs, its full height now apparent. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The bear was enormous, easily 8 feet tall. When standing, Emily slowly raised her arms, making herself appear as large as possible. "I'm not a threat," she continued, her voice a bit steadier now. "I'm just going to back away slowly." She began to take small steps backward, keeping her eyes on the bear, but avoiding direct eye contact. The bear dropped back down to all fours, its head lowered as it watched her intently. For a moment, Emily dared to hope that the encounter would end peacefully. But then, with a suddenness that made her gasp, the bear dropped to all fours and charged. "Oh God," Emily breathed, her hand fumbling for the bear spray on her belt. The bear's thunderous footfalls grew louder as it closed the distance between them with frightening speed. Emily's fingers finally closed around the canister of bear spray, but in her panic she struggled to remove it from its holster. "Come on," she muttered frantically, her eyes never leaving the charging bear. 20 yards. 15. 10. The bear's powerful muscles rippled under its thick fur as it barreled towards her. Emily could see its eyes now, dark and intent, fixed on her. With a final desperate tug, Emily freed the bear spray from its holster. She raised it, her hand shaking as she aimed at the oncoming bear. "Please work," she whispered, and pressed down on the trigger. A stream of orange spray erupted from the canister, forming a cloud in the air between Emily and the bear. For a heart-stopping moment, Emily thought she had missed, that the spray wouldn't reach the bear in time. But then the bear ran headlong into the cloud of spray. It reared up on its hind legs, roaring in pain and confusion. Emily continued to spray, creating a barrier between herself and the enraged animal. The bear shook its massive head, pawing at its eyes and nose. It took a few stumbling steps backward, clearly disoriented by the spray. Emily's heart soared with hope. The spray was working, but her relief was short-lived. As the bear backed away from the cloud of spray, it swung its head from side to side, its eyes wild with pain and fear. One of its massive paws, armed with long, sharp claws, swung out blindly. Emily tried to jump back, but she wasn't quick enough. The bear's claws raked across her right leg, tearing through her running tights and into her flesh. White-hot pain exploded through her body, and she cried out, stumbling backward and falling to the ground. No, she gasped, scrambling backward on the forest floor, her injured leg leaving a trail of blood on the fallen leaves. The bear, still affected by the spray, let out another roar. It paced back and forth, shaking its head and snorting. Emily held her breath, waiting to see if it would charge again, but the pepper spray had done its job. After a few more moments of confused pacing, the bear turned and lumbered off into the underbrush, leaving Emily alone on the trail. For several long moments, Emily remained where she had fallen, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The pain in her leg was intense, but the adrenaline coursing through her system dulled it somewhat. Finally, when she was sure the bear was gone, Emily pushed herself up into a sitting position. She looked down at her leg, wincing at the sight of the torn fabric and the blood seeping through. "Okay, Emily," she said aloud, her voice shaky. "You're a nurse. You know what to do. Assess the damage." With trembling hands, she carefully peeled back the torn fabric of her running tights. 3 long gashes ran down the outside of her thigh, deep enough to need stitches, but not, thankfully, life-threatening if she could stop the bleeding. Emily took off her light jacket and pressed it against the wounds, gritting her teeth against the pain. With her free hand, she reached for her phone, silently thanking whatever forces were listening that it hadn't been damaged in the fall. She dialed 911, her fingers leaving smears of blood on the screen. As the phone rang, Emily looked around, suddenly very aware of how alone she was in the vast Alaskan wilderness. "Wevan, what's your emergency?" The operator's calm voice was like a lifeline. "This is Emily Carter," she said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "I'm on the Creamer's Field Trail, about a mile from the North Farmers Loop Road trailhead. I've been attacked by a bear. I'm injured and need assistance." The operator's voice remained calm and professional. "Understood, Emily. Are you in a safe location now? Is the bear still in the area?" Emily glanced around nervously. "I think I'm safe. The bear left after I used my pepper spray, but I don't know if it will come back." "All right, Emily. I'm dispatching park rangers and emergency medical services to your location now. Can you describe your injuries?" Emily looked down at her leg, where blood was seeping through her makeshift bandage. "Lacerations to my right thigh from the bear's claws. They're deep, but I've managed to slow the bleeding. I'm a nurse, so I can keep pressure on the wound until help arrives." "That's good, Emily. You're doing great," the operator reassured her. "Now I want you to stay on the line with me until help arrives. Can you do that?" "Yes," Emily replied, her voice small. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and the full impact of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. "Yes, I can do that." As she sat there on the forest floor, her leg throbbing with pain, Emily found herself looking at the beautiful Alaskan wilderness around her with new eyes. The forest that had seemed so welcoming, so full of life and beauty, now felt alien and threatening. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made her flinch. expecting to see the bear returning to finish what it had started. But as the minutes ticked by and the sound of approaching sirens grew louder, Emily felt a different emotion begin to well up inside her. Not fear, not pain, but a sort of grim determination. She had faced one of her worst fears and survived. She had kept her wits about her and done what needed to be done. As the first park ranger appeared on the trail, Emily allowed herself a small, pained smile. She was battered, bleeding and more than a little traumatized, but she was alive. And in that moment, as the morning sun filtered through the trees and glinted off the ranger's badge, Emily knew that this was a story she would be telling for years to come. Chapter 4. The charge. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the massive brown bear 30 yards ahead on the trail. Time seemed to slow down as her mind raced through everything she knew about bear encounters. Don't run. Make yourself big. Slowly back away. She took a deep, shaky breath, trying to calm her racing pulse. "Hey, bear," she called out, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to sound calm. "I see you there. I'm just passing through, okay?" The bear's ears twitched at the sound of her voice. It rose up on its hind legs, its full height now apparent. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The bear was enormous, easily 8 feet tall. When standing, Emily slowly raised her arms, making herself appear as large as possible. "I'm not a threat," she continued, her voice a bit steadier now. "I'm just going to back away slowly." She began to take small steps backward, keeping her eyes on the bear but avoiding direct eye contact. The bear dropped back down to all fours, its head lowered as it watched her intently. For a moment, Emily dared to hope that the encounter would end peacefully. But then, with a suddenness that made her gasp, the bear dropped to all fours and charged. "Oh God," Emily breathed, her hand fumbling for the bear spray on her belt. The bear's thunderous footfalls grew louder as it closed the distance between them with frightening speed. Emily's fingers finally closed around the canister of bear spray, but in her panic she struggled to remove it from its holster. Come on," she muttered frantically, her eyes never leaving the charging bear. 20 yards, 15, 10. The bear's powerful muscles rippled under its thick fur as it barreled towards her. Emily could see its eyes now, dark and intent, fixed on her. With a final desperate tug, Emily freed the bear spray from its holster. She raised it, her hand shaking as she aimed at the oncoming bear. "Please work," she whispered, and pressed down on the trigger. A stream of orange spray erupted from the canister, forming a cloud in the air between Emily and the bear. For a heart-stopping moment, Emily thought she had missed, that the spray wouldn't reach the bear in time. But then the bear ran headlong into the cloud of spray. It reared up on its hind legs, roaring in pain and confusion. Emily continued to spray, creating a barrier between herself and the enraged animal. The bear shook its massive head, pouring at its eyes and nose. It took a few stumbling steps backward, clearly disoriented by the spray. Emily's heart soared with hope. The spray was working, but her relief was short-lived. As the bear backed away from the cloud of spray, it swung its head from side to side, its eyes wild with pain and fear. One of its massive paws, armed with long, sharp claws, swung out blindly. Emily tried to jump back, but she wasn't quick enough. The bear's claws raked across her right leg, tearing through her running tights and into her flesh. White-hot pain exploded through her body, and she cried out, stumbling backward and falling to the ground. No, she gasped, scrambling backward on the forest floor, her injured leg leaving a trail of blood on the fallen leaves. The bear, still affected by the spray, let out another roar. It paced back and forth, shaking its head and snorting. Emily held her breath, waiting to see if it would charge again. But the pepper spray had done its job. After a few more moments of confused pacing, the bear turned and lumbered off into the underbrush, leaving Emily alone on the trail. For several long moments, Emily remained where she had fallen, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The pain in her leg was intense, but the adrenaline coursing through her system dulled it somewhat. Finally, when she was sure the bear was gone, Emily pushed herself up into a sitting position. She looked down at her leg, wincing at the sight of the torn fabric and the blood seeping through. "Okay, Emily," she said aloud, her voice shaky. "You're a nurse, you know what to do. Assess the damage." With trembling hands, she carefully peeled back the torn fabric of her running tights. 3 long gashes ran down the outside of her thigh, deep enough to need stitches, but not, thankfully, life-threatening if she could stop the bleeding. Emily took off her light jacket and pressed it against the wounds, gritting her teeth against the pain. With her free hand, she reached for her phone, silently thanking whatever forces were listening that it hadn't been damaged in the fall. She dialed 911, her fingers leaving smears of blood on the screen. As the phone rang, Emily looked around, suddenly very aware of how alone she was in the vast Alaskan wilderness. "Malweven, what's your emergency?" The operator's calm voice was like a lifeline. "This is Emily Carter," she said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "I'm on the Creamers Field Trail, about a mile from the North Farmers Loop Road trailhead. I've been attacked by a bear. I'm injured and need assistance." The operator's voice remained calm and professional. "Understood, Emily. Are you in a safe location now? Is the bear still in the area?" Emily glanced around nervously. "I think I'm safe. The bear left after I used my pepper spray, but I don't know if it will come back." "All right, Emily. I'm dispatching park rangers and emergency medical services to your location now. Can you describe your injuries?" Emily looked down at her leg, where blood was seeping through her makeshift bandage. "Lacerations to my right thigh. From the bear's claws. They're deep, but I've managed to slow the bleeding. I'm a nurse, so I can keep pressure on the wound until help arrives." "That's good, Emily. You're doing great," the operator reassured her. "Now I want you to stay on the line with me until help arrives. Can you do that?" "Yes," Emily replied, her voice small. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and the full impact of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. "Yes, I can do that." As she waited for help to arrive, Emily tried to focus on her breathing, using techniques she often suggested to anxious patients. In, out, in, out. But every sound from the forest around her made her flinch, her eyes darting around, searching for any sign of the bear's return. "Emily, are you still there?" The operator's voice broke through her rising panic. "Yes, I'm here," Emily responded, grateful for the distraction. "Good, can you tell me a bit more about where you are? Are there any landmarks nearby that might help the rescue team find you?" Emily looked around, trying to focus on the details of her surroundings rather than her fear. "I'm about a mile down the trail from the North Farmers Loop Road trailhead. There's a large fallen spruce tree about 50 yards back the way I came, and there's a patch of fireweed in bloom just off the trail to my right." "That's excellent. Emily, that will really help the team locate you quickly. Now, how are you feeling? Are you experiencing any dizziness or shortness of breath?" Emily did a quick self-assessment. "No dizziness. My breathing is a bit fast, but I think that's just from the shock. The pain in my leg is intense but manageable." "You're doing great, Emily. I know it's scary, but you're handling this incredibly well. I can hear the sirens now. Help should be there very soon." True to the operator's words, Emily could hear the faint wail of sirens in the distance, growing steadily louder. Relief washed over her, bringing with it a wave of exhaustion. She leaned back against a tree trunk, keeping pressure on her wound, and closed her eyes for a moment. The sound of voices and rustling underbrush snapped her back to alertness. "Hello? Emily Carter?" a male voice called out. "Here! I'm over here!" Emily shouted back, her voice cracking with emotion. 2 park rangers emerged from around a bend in the trail, followed closely by paramedics. The lead ranger, a tall man with a graying beard, knelt beside her. "Ms. Carter? I'm Ranger Mike Holbrook. You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here and to the hospital, okay?" Emily nodded, tears of relief welling up in her eyes. As the paramedics began to assess her injuries and prepare her for transport, Ranger Holbrook asked her to recount what had happened. Emily described the encounter as clearly as she could, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. The ranger nodded approvingly as she mentioned using the bear spray. "You did everything right, Ms. Carter," he assured her. "Using that bear spray likely saved your life." As the paramedics carefully lifted her onto a stretcher, Emily found herself looking back down the trail, half expecting to see the bear watching from the shadows. But there was nothing there but the peaceful Alaskan forest, now bathed in the full light of morning. As they began to move her towards the waiting ambulance, Emily felt a complex mix of emotions washing over her. Fear, certainly, and pain. But also a strange sense of accomplishment. She had faced one of nature's most formidable predators and survived. "You know," she said to Ranger Holbrook as they neared the trailhead, "I moved to Alaska for the adventure. I guess I got more than I bargained for today." The ranger chuckled. "That you did, Miss Carter, that you did, but you handled it like a true Alaskan. You've got quite a story to tell now." As the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, Emily caught one last glimpse of the trail disappearing into the forest. Despite everything, she felt a pull towards it, a reminder of why she had chosen this wild and beautiful place as her home. The ambulance doors closed, and as they began the drive to the hospital, Emily closed her eyes. The day's adventure was over, but she knew that its impact would stay with her for a long time to come. In facing her fear and surviving, she had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed. And in the vast, untamed wilderness of Alaska, that was a discovery worth making. Chapter 5. The Attack. The world seemed to slow down as Emily watched the massive brown bear charge towards her. Her heart pounded in her chest, blood rushing in her ears as adrenaline surged through her body. Time stretched out, each second feeling like an eternity as the bear closed the distance between them. Emily's hand fumbled for the bear spray canister on her belt, her fingers clumsy with fear. Come on, she muttered, her eyes never leaving the oncoming bear. 20 yards, 15, 10. The bear's powerful muscles rippled under its thick fur as it barreled towards her. Emily could see its eyes now, dark and intent, fixed on her with terrifying focus. With a final desperate tug, Emily freed the bear spray from its holster. She raised it, her hand shaking as she aimed at the charging bear. "Please work," she whispered, and pressed down on the trigger. A stream of orange spray erupted from the canister, forming a cloud in the air between Emily and the bear. For a heart-stopping moment, Emily thought she had missed, that the spray wouldn't reach the bear in time. But then the bear ran headlong into the cloud of spray. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The bear reared up on its hind legs, roaring in pain and confusion. It shook its massive head, pawing at its eyes and nose. Emily continued to spray, creating a barrier between herself and the enraged animal. "Back off," Emily shouted, her voice hoarse with fear and determination. "Go away!" The bear stumbled backwards, clearly disoriented by the spray. It swung its head from side to side, snorting and huffing. Emily's heart soared with hope. The spray was working. She took a cautious step backward, ready to turn and run if the bear retreated. But her relief was short-lived. As the bear backed away from the cloud of spray, it swung its head wildly, its eyes wild with pain and fear. One of its massive paws, armed with long, sharp claws, swung out blindly. Emily tried to jump back, but she wasn't quick enough. The bear's claws raked across her right leg, tearing through her running tights and into her flesh. White-hot pain exploded through her body, and she cried out, stumbling backward and falling to the ground. "No, no, no," she gasped, scrambling. Backward on the forest floor, her injured leg leaving a trail of blood on the fallen leaves. The bear, still affected by the spray, let out another roar. It paced back and forth, shaking its head and snorting. Emily held her breath, waiting to see if it would charge again. Her hand gripped the bear spray tightly, ready to use it again if necessary. "Stay back," she warned, her voice trembling. "Don't come any closer." For what felt like an eternity, Emily and the bear remained in a tense standoff. The bear continued to shake its head and paw at its face, clearly struggling with the effects of the spray. Emily kept the canister raised, her eyes darting between the bear and her injured leg. Finally, after what seemed like hours, but was likely only a few minutes, the bear turned and lumbered off into the underbrush. Its heavy footfalls faded into the distance, leaving Emily alone on the trail. For several long moments, Emily remained where she had fallen, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The pain in her leg was intense, but the adrenaline coursing through her system dulled it somewhat. She listened intently, straining to hear any sign that the bear might be returning. When she was sure the bear was gone, Emily pushed herself up into a sitting position. She looked down at her leg, wincing at the sight of the torn fabric and the blood seeping through. "Okay, Emily," she said aloud, her voice shaky. "You're a nurse. You know what to do. Assess the damage." With trembling hands, she carefully peeled back the torn fabric of her running tights. 3 long gashes ran down the outside of her thigh, deep enough to need stitches, but not, thankfully, life-threatening if she could stop the bleeding. Emily took off her light jacket and pressed it against the wounds, gritting her teeth against the pain. Pressure. Keep pressure on it, she reminded herself, falling back on her medical training. With her free hand, she reached for her phone, silently thanking whatever forces were listening that it hadn't been damaged in the fall. She dialed 911, her fingers leaving smears of blood on the screen. As the phone rang, Emily looked around, suddenly very aware of how alone she was in the vast Alaskan wilderness. The forest that had seemed so welcoming just minutes ago now felt oppressive and threatening. Every rustle of leaves made her flinch, imagining the bear returning to finish what it had started. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice was like a lifeline. This is Emily Carter, she said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. I'm on the Creamersfield Trail, about a mile from the North Farmers Loop Road trailhead. I've been attacked by a bear. I'm injured and need assistance. The operator's voice remained calm and professional. Understood, Emily. Are you in a safe location now? Is the bear still in the area? Emily glanced around nervously. I think I'm safe. The bear left after I used my pepper spray, but I don't know if it will come back. All right, Emily. I'm dispatching park rangers and emergency medical services to your location now. Can you describe your injuries? Emily looked down at her leg, where blood was seeping through her makeshift bandage. Lacerations to my right thigh, from the bear's claws. They're deep, but I've managed to slow the bleeding. I'm a nurse, so I can keep pressure on the wound until help arrives. That's good, Emily. You're doing great, the operator reassured her. Now I want you to stay on the line with me until help arrives. Can you do that? Yes, Emily replied, her voice small. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and the full impact of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. Yes, I can do that. As she waited for help to arrive, Emily tried to focus on her breathing, using techniques she often suggested to anxious patients. In, out, in, out. But every sound from the forest around her made her flinch, her eyes darting around, searching for any sign of the bear's return. Emily, are you still there? The operator's voice broke through her rising panic. Yes, I'm here, Emily responded, grateful for the distraction. Good. Can you tell me a bit more about where you are? Are there any landmarks nearby that might help the rescue team find you? Emily looked around, trying to focus on the details of her surroundings rather than her fear. I'm about a mile down the trail from the North Farmers Loop Road trailhead. There's a large fallen spruce tree about 50 yards back the way I came. And there's a patch of fireweed in bloom just off the trail to my right. That's excellent, Emily. That will really help the team locate you quickly. Now, how are you feeling? Are you experiencing any dizziness or shortness of breath? Emily did a quick self-assessment. No dizziness. My breathing is a bit fast, but I think that's just from the shock. The pain in my leg is intense, but manageable. You're doing great, Emily. I know it's scary, but you're handling this incredibly well. I can hear the sirens now. Help should be there very soon. True to the operator's words, Emily could hear the faint wail of sirens in the distance growing steadily louder. Relief washed over her, bringing with it a wave of exhaustion. She leaned back against a tree trunk, keeping pressure on her wound, and closed her eyes for a moment. The sound of voices and rustling underbrush snapped her back to alertness. Hello? Emily Carter, a male voice called out. Here, I'm over here, Emily shouted back, her voice cracking with emotion. Two park rangers emerged from around a bend in the trail, followed closely by paramedics. The lead ranger, a tall man with a graying beard, knelt beside her. Ms. Carter, I'm Ranger Mike Holbrook. You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here and to the hospital, okay? Emily nodded, tears of relief welling up in her eyes. As the paramedics began to assess her injuries and prepare her for transport, Ranger Holbrook asked her to recount what had happened. Emily described the encounter as clearly as she could, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. The ranger nodded, approvingly as she mentioned using the bear spray. You did everything right, Miss Carter, he assured her. Using that bear spray likely saved your life. As the paramedics carefully lifted her onto a stretcher, Emily found herself looking back, down the trail, half expecting to see the bear watching from the shadows. But there was nothing there but the peaceful Alaskan forest, now bathed in the full light of morning. As they began to move her towards the waiting ambulance, Emily felt a complex mix of emotions washing over her. Fear, certainly, and pain, but also a strange sense of accomplishment. She had faced one of nature's most formidable predators and survived. "You know," she said to Ranger Holbrook as they neared the trailhead, "I moved to Alaska for the adventure. I guess I got more than I bargained for today." The ranger chuckled. "That you did, Miss Carter, that you did, but you handled it like a true Alaskan. You've got quite a story to tell now." As the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, Emily caught one last glimpse of the trail disappearing into the forest. Despite everything, she felt a pull towards it, a reminder of why she had chosen this wild and beautiful place as her home. The ambulance doors closed, and as they began the drive to the hospital, Emily closed her eyes. The day's adventure was over, but she knew that its impact would stay with her for a long time to come. In facing her fear and surviving, she had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed. And in the vast, untamed wilderness of Alaska, that was a discovery worth making. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. The bear's final roar echoed through the forest as it lumbered away, leaving Emily trembling and bleeding on the forest floor. For several long moments, she remained frozen in place, her ears straining for any sign that the massive predator might return. The only sounds were her own ragged breathing and the gentle rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. As the immediate danger passed, the full weight of what had just happened began to sink in. Emily looked down at her leg, wincing at the sight of torn flesh and the blood seeping through her makeshift bandage. The pain, dulled by adrenaline during the attack, now flared with renewed intensity. "Okay, Emily," she muttered to herself, her voice shaky but determined. "You're not out of the woods yet, literally and figuratively." With trembling hands, she reached for her phone, silently thanking whatever forces were listening that it hadn't been damaged in the fall. She dialed 911, leaving smears of blood on the screen as she did so. "Dame Wan, what's your emergency?" The operator's calm voice was a lifeline in the wilderness. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. "This is Emily Carter. I'm on the Creamer's Field Trail, about a mile from the North Farmers Loop Road trailhead. I've been attacked by a bear. I'm injured and need assistance." The operator's professional tone never wavered. "Understood, Emily. Are you in a safe location now? Is the bear still in the area?" Emily glanced around nervously, suddenly very aware of how exposed she was. "I think I'm safe. The bear left after I used my pepper spray, but I don't know if it will come back." "All right, Emily. I'm dispatching park rangers and emergency medical services to your location now. Can you describe your injuries?" Emily looked down at her leg, where blood was continuing to seep through her jacket-turned bandage. "Lacerations to my right thigh from the bear's claws. They're deep, but I've managed to slow the bleeding. I'm a nurse, so I can keep pressure on the wound until help arrives." "That's good, Emily. You're doing great," the operator reassured her. "Now I want you to stay on the line with me until help arrives. Can you do that?" "Yes," Emily replied, her voice small. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and the full impact of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. "Yes, I can. Do that." As she waited for help to arrive, Emily tried to focus on her breathing, using techniques she often suggested to anxious patients. In, out, in, out. But every sound from the forest around her made her flinch, her eyes darting around, searching for any sign of the bear's return. "Emily, are you still there?" The operator's voice broke through her rising panic. "Yes, I'm here," Emily responded, grateful for the distraction. "Good. Can you tell me a bit more about where you are? Are there any landmarks nearby that might help the rescue team find you?" Emily looked around, trying to focus on the details of her surroundings rather than her fear. "I'm about a mile down the trail from the North Farmers Loop Road trailhead. There's a large fallen spruce tree about 50 yards back the way I came. And there's a patch of fireweed in bloom just off the trail to my right." "That's excellent. Emily, that will really help the team locate you quickly. Now, how are you feeling? Are you experiencing any dizziness or shortness of breath?" Emily did a quick self-assessment. "No dizziness. My breathing is a bit fast, but I think that's just from the shock. The pain in my leg is intense but manageable." "You're doing great, Emily. I know it's scary, but you're handling this incredibly well. I can hear the sirens now. Help should be there very soon." True to the operator's words, Emily could hear the faint wail of sirens in the distance, growing steadily louder. Relief washed over her, bringing with it a wave of exhaustion. She leaned back against a tree trunk, keeping pressure on her wound, and closed her eyes for a moment. The sound of voices and rustling underbrush snapped her back to alertness. "Hello? Emily Carter?" A male voice called out. "Here, I'm over here," Emily shouted back, her voice cracking with emotion. Two park rangers emerged from around a bend in the trail, followed closely by paramedics. The lead ranger, a tall man with a graying beard, knelt beside her. "Miss Carter, I'm Ranger Mike Holbrook. You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here and to the hospital, okay?" Emily nodded, tears of relief welling up in her eyes. As the paramedics began to assess her injuries and prepare her for transport, Ranger Holbrook asked her to recount what had happened. Emily described the encounter as clearly as she could, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. The ranger nodded, approvingly, as she mentioned using the bear spray. "You did everything right, Miss Carter," he assured her. "Using that bear spray likely saved your life." As the paramedics carefully lifted her onto a stretcher, Emily found herself looking back down the trail, half expecting to see the bear watching from the shadows. But there was nothing there but the peaceful Alaskan forest, now bathed in the full light of morning. "Ranger Holbrook," Emily said as they began to move towards the trailhead, "what will happen to the bear?" The ranger's expression turned serious. "We'll track it to make sure it's not seriously injured. Bears usually avoid humans, so this kind of attack is rare. It's possible the bear was surprised or felt threatened. We'll monitor the area, but unless it shows further aggressive behavior, we typically let the bear be." Emily nodded, processing this information. As much as the attack had terrified her, she understood that she had entered the bear's territory. The thought of the animal being hunted because of their encounter didn't sit well with her. As they neared the trailhead, Emily felt a complex mix of emotions washing over her. Fear, certainly, and pain, but also a strange sense of accomplishment. She had faced one of nature's most formidable predators and survived. "You know," she said to Ranger Holbrook, "I moved to Alaska for the adventure. I guess I got more than I bargained for today." The ranger chuckled. "That you did, Miss Carter, that you did. But you handled it like a true Alaskan. You've got quite a story to tell now." As the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, Emily caught one last glimpse of the trail disappearing into the forest. Despite everything, she felt a pull towards it, a reminder of why she had chosen this wild and beautiful place as her home. The ambulance doors closed, and as they began the drive to the hospital, Emily closed her eyes. The day's adventure was over, but she knew that its impact would stay with her for a long time to come. In facing her fear and surviving, she had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed. At the hospital, Emily was immediately taken to the emergency room. Dr. Sarah Nguyen, the attending physician, examined her wounds with a practiced eye. "You're lucky, Miss Carter," Dr. Nguyen said as she cleaned the gashes. "These are deep, but they've missed any major blood vessels. You'll need quite a few stitches, and there will be some scarring. But with proper care, you should heal well." As the doctor worked, Emily found herself recounting the story again, this time from a medical perspective. "I used my jacket as a makeshift pressure bandage," she explained. "I knew I had to control the bleeding." Dr. Nguyen nodded approvingly. "Your quick thinking and medical training certainly helped. Now let's get you patched up." The process of cleaning and stitching the wounds was painful, but Emily gritted her teeth through it. As Dr. Nguyen worked, Emily's mind wandered back to the trail, to the moment when she'd locked eyes with the bear. She shuddered involuntarily. "Are you okay?" Dr. Nguyen asked, pausing in her work. Emily nodded. Just processing, I guess. It all happened so fast, but now it feels like I can remember every second in vivid detail." "That's normal," the doctor assured her. "You've been through a traumatic experience. It's going to take some time to work through it, both physically and emotionally." As the last stitch was placed, Emily felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving her drained and sore. "We'd like to keep you overnight for observation," Dr. Nguyen said, "just to make sure there's no sign of infection. Is there anyone you'd like us to call for you?" Emily thought for a moment. Her parents were back in Oregon, and she didn't want to worry them unnecessarily. "No," she said finally. "I'll be okay, but could I maybe talk to someone from the local news? I think it might help to share what happened. Maybe it could help someone else stay safe." Dr. Nguyen smiled. "I think that can be arranged. For now, though, try to get some rest. You've had quite a day, Emily." As she settled into the hospital bed, Emily's thoughts returned to the trail, to the moment when the bear spray had worked and the animal had turned away. She had survived. She had faced one of her greatest fears and come out the other side. Tomorrow she would share her story. She would talk about the importance of bear safety, of being prepared when venturing into the wilderness. But for now, in the quiet of the hospital room, Emily Carter closed her eyes and let herself rest, knowing that she was forever changed by her encounter in the Alaskan wild. Chapter 7. The Rescue. The distant wail of sirens grew steadily louder, piercing through the quiet of the Alaskan forest. Emily Carter, still seated on the ground with her makeshift bandage pressed firmly against her wounded leg, felt a wave of relief wash over her. Help was coming. "Emily, can you hear the sirens?" The 911 operator's voice crackled through her phone. "Yes," Emily replied, her voice shaky but clear. "I can hear them. They're getting closer." "That's great, Emily. The rescue team should be with you very soon. Remember to keep pressure on that wound and try to stay calm. You're doing wonderfully." Emily nodded, even though the operator couldn't see her. She took a deep breath, wincing as a fresh wave of pain shot through her leg. The adrenaline from the bear attack was wearing off, and the full extent of her injuries was becoming more apparent with each passing moment. The sound of rustling leaves and snapping twigs caught her attention. Emily's heart rate spiked, her mind immediately jumping to the fear that the bear had returned. But then she heard something that made her shoulders sag with relief. Human voices. "Hello? Emily Carter?" A strong male voice called out. "Here, I'm over here," Emily shouted back, her voice cracking with emotion. Two figures emerged from around a bend in the trail. Park rangers, their uniforms a welcome sight in the sea of green and brown that surrounded her. Close behind them came two paramedics, carrying medical equipment. The lead ranger, a tall man with a salt and pepper beard, knelt beside her. His name tag read Holbrook. "Ms. Carter, I'm Ranger Mike Holbrook. You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here and to the hospital, okay?" Emily nodded, tears of relief welling up in her eyes. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. As the paramedics began to assess her injuries, Ranger Holbrook gently asked her to recount what had happened. Emily took a deep breath and began to tell her story, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. "I was about a mile into my run when I encountered the bear. It was huge, a brown bear, probably a grizzly. I tried to back away slowly, but it charged. I managed to use my bear spray, but not before it got me with its claws." Ranger Holbrook nodded, his expression grave but approving. "You did everything right, Ms. Carter. Using that bear spray likely saved your life." One of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes, carefully removed Emily's makeshift bandage to examine the wounds. "These are deep lacerations," she said, "but you did a great job controlling the bleeding. We're going to clean and dress these wounds before we move you, okay?" Emily nodded, gritting her teeth as the paramedic began to clean her injuries. The pain was intense, but she focused on her breathing, using techniques she often suggested to her own patients. As the paramedics worked, Ranger Holbrook continued to ask Emily questions about the encounter. "Can you describe where exactly the attack took place? It's important for us to locate the site." Emily closed her eyes, visualizing the trail. It was just past a large fallen spruce tree. There's a patch of fireweed blooming nearby, on the right side of the trail. The ranger made notes on a small pad. "That's very helpful, thank you. We'll need to investigate the area and make sure the bear isn't still in the vicinity." A thought suddenly occurred to Emily. "What will happen to the bear?" she asked, surprised by the concern in her own voice. Ranger Holbrook's expression softened. "We'll track it to make sure it's not seriously injured. Bears usually avoid humans, so this kind of attack is rare. It's possible the bear was surprised or felt threatened. We'll monitor the area, but unless it shows further aggressive behavior, we typically let the bear be." Emily nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and unease. As much as the attack had terrified her, she understood that she had entered the bear's territory. The thought of the animal being hunted because of their encounter didn't sit well with her. The paramedics finished dressing her wounds and prepared to move her onto a stretcher. "We're going to lift you now, Ms. Carter," the male paramedic said. "Try to relax and let us do the work." As they carefully lifted her onto the stretcher, Emily couldn't help but look back down the trail. Part of her almost expected to see the bear watching from the shadows. But there was nothing there but the peaceful Alaskan forest, now bathed in the full light of morning. The journey back to the trailhead was slow and careful. Emily lay on the stretcher, staring up at the canopy of leaves above her, occasionally broken by patches of blue sky. Despite the pain and the lingering fear, she found herself marveling at the beauty of her surroundings. "You know," she said to Ranger Holbrook as they neared the trailhead, "I moved to Alaska for the adventure. I guess I got more than I bargained for today," the ranger chuckled. "That you did, Miss Carter, that you did. But you handled it like a true Alaskan. You've got quite a story to tell now." As they emerged from the trail, Emily saw the flashing lights of the ambulance waiting in the parking lot. A small crowd had gathered, other hikers and joggers drawn by the commotion. Emily felt a flush of embarrassment at being the center of attention, but she also noticed the looks of concern and sympathy on the faces around her. As the paramedics prepared to load her into the ambulance, a thought struck Emily. "My car," she said, suddenly remembering. "It's still in the parking lot." Ranger Holbrook patted her shoulder reassuringly. "Don't worry about that. We'll make sure it's taken care of. Your health is the priority right now." Emily nodded gratefully. As the paramedics lifted the stretcher into the ambulance, she caught one last glimpse of the trail disappearing into the forest. Despite everything that had happened, she felt a pull towards it, a reminder of why she had chosen this wild and beautiful place as her home. The ambulance doors closed, and as they began the drive to the hospital, Emily closed her eyes. The day's adventure was over, but she knew that its impact would stay with her for a long time to come. In facing her fear and surviving, she had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed. During the ride to the hospital, the female paramedic, whose name tag read Sarah, monitored Emily's vital signs and kept her engaged in conversation. "You mentioned you're a nurse," Sarah asked as she checked Emily's blood pressure. Emily nodded. "Yeah, at Fairbanks Memorial, Emergency Department." Sarah smiled. "Well, you certainly kept your cool in an emergency situation. Your quick thinking probably prevented this from being much worse." As they neared the hospital, Emily found herself thinking about her co-workers, about the shift she was supposed to work later that day. "I guess I'll be calling out sick," she said with a weak laugh. Sarah patted her arm gently. "I think they'll understand. You've certainly earned a day off." The ambulance pulled up to the emergency entrance of Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. As the doors opened and the stretcher was lowered, Emily saw familiar faces, her co-workers, alerted to her arrival, waiting to receive her. Dr. Chen, one of the attending physicians Emily often worked with, approached the stretcher. "Emily?" he said, his voice a mixture of professional concern and personal worry. "Let's get you taken care of." As they wheeled her into the emergency department, Emily felt a strange sense of déjà vu. She had been through these doors countless times, but never like this, never as the patient. It was disorienting, but also oddly comforting to be in familiar surroundings. "Okay, Emily," Dr. Chen said, as they transferred her to an examination bed. "Let's take a look at those wounds and get you patched up. Then we can talk about what happened. I have a feeling this is going to be quite a story." As the medical team began to work, cleaning and assessing her injuries, Emily closed her eyes. The events of the morning played through her mind like a vivid film. The bear's sudden appearance, the heart-stopping moment of the charge, the pain of the attack, and the long, anxious wait for rescue. She had survived. She had faced one of her greatest fears and come out the other side. As the pain medication began to take effect and the voices of her colleagues faded into a comforting background hum, Emily Carter drifted into an exhausted sleep, knowing that when she woke she would have a tale to tell, a tale of survival in the Alaskan wild. Chapter 8. The report Emily Carter woke to the sterile white ceiling of her hospital room. the events of the previous day flooding back in a rush of vivid memories. She blinked, adjusting to the soft morning light filtering through the window. The pain in her leg had dulled to a persistent throb, thanks to the medication coursing through her system. A gentle knock at the door drew her attention. "Come in," she called, her voice slightly hoarse. Dr. Sarah Nguyen, the attending physician who had treated her wounds, entered with a warm smile. "Good morning, Emily. How are you feeling today?" Emily attempted to sit up, wincing slightly. "Better than yesterday, that's for sure. Still sore, but I guess that's to be expected after wrestling with a bear." Dr. Nguyen chuckled as she checked Emily's vitals. "Well, your sense of humor is intact, which is a good sign. The wounds are looking clean, no signs of infection. We'll want to keep you for one more day of observation, but you're healing well." As the doctor finished her examination, Emily cleared her throat. "Dr. Nguyen, I was wondering, I'd like to talk to someone from the local news. I think it might be important to share what happened, you know. Maybe it could help someone else stay safe." Dr. Nguyen nodded thoughtfully. "I think that's a great idea, Emily. It just so happens that a reporter from KTVF, our local NBC affiliate, called this morning asking if you'd be willing to give an interview. Would you like me to let them know you're up for it?" Emily nodded, a mixture of nervousness and determination settling in her stomach. "Yes, please, I think it's important." A few hours later, after Emily had eaten and made herself as presentable as possible in a hospital gown, there was another knock at her door. A young woman with a friendly face and a KTVF badge entered, followed by a cameraman. "Ms. Carter, I'm Lisa Hansen from KTVF News. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us. How are you feeling?" Emily smiled, gesturing to her bandaged leg. "I've been better, but I'm grateful to be here. Please, call me Emily." Lisa set up for the interview, positioning herself next to Emily's bed while the cameraman prepared his equipment. "Emily, we'll just ask you a few questions about your experience. Feel free to take your time, and if you need a break, just let us know. Ready?" Emily took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The red light on the camera blinked on, and Lisa began. "I'm here with Emily Carter, a local nurse who survived a harrowing encounter with a brown bear while jogging near her home in Fairbanks. Emily, can you tell us what happened?" Emily recounted the events of that morning, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. She described her routine jog, the sudden appearance of the bear, and the heart-stopping moment when it charged. "I remembered my bear safety training," Emily explained. "I tried to appear non-threatening, but when the bear charged, I knew I had to use my bear spray. It was terrifying, but the spray worked. It disoriented the bear enough for it to back off." Lisa leaned in, her expression a mix of concern and admiration. "But you were injured in the attack, correct?" Emily nodded, gesturing to her leg. "Yes. The bear managed to swipe at me with its claws before the spray took full effect. I have some deep lacerations on my thigh, but thanks to quick medical attention, they're healing well." "That must have been terrifying," Lisa said. "How did you manage to get help?" Emily described her call to 911, the long wait for rescue, and her relief when the park rangers and paramedics arrived. "I can't thank them enough for their quick response and professionalism. They truly saved my life." Lisa nodded, then asked, "Emily, you're a nurse at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. Do you think your medical training helped you in this situation?" "Absolutely," Emily replied without hesitation. "My training kicked in almost automatically. I knew I had to control the bleeding and stay calm. It definitely made a difference in those crucial moments after the attack." "What message would you like to share with our viewers about bear safety and hiking in Alaska?" Emily sat up a little straighter, her expression serious. "I want to emphasize how important it is to be prepared when you're out in the Alaskan wilderness. Always carry bear spray and know how to use it. Make noise while you're hiking or running to avoid surprising bears. And most importantly, educate yourself about bear behavior and safety protocols. We share this beautiful land with these animals, and it's our responsibility to coexist safely." Lisa smiled warmly. "Thank you, Emily, for sharing your story with us. Your courage and presence of mind are truly inspiring. We wish you a speedy recovery." As the camera light blinked off, Emily let out a long breath, feeling a mix of relief and accomplishment. Lisa reached out and squeezed her hand. That was excellent, Emily. Your story will definitely make an impact. Is there anything else you'd like to add off camera? Emily thought for a moment. Just that I hope this incident doesn't make people afraid of enjoying our beautiful Alaskan wilderness. Yes, there are risks, but with proper precautions, the benefits far outweigh the dangers. After the news crew left, Emily sank back into her pillows, feeling drained but satisfied. She had shared her story, and hopefully it would help others. Stay safe. Throughout the day, Emily received a steady stream of visitors. Her co-workers from the hospital stopped by, bringing flowers and well wishes. Ranger Holbrook checked in, updating her on the bear situation, no further sightings, and commending her again on her handling of the attack. As evening approached, Emily's phone buzzed with a text from her mother back in Oregon. Just saw you. On the national news, call me ASAP. Emily chuckled, realizing her story had traveled far beyond Fairbanks. She dialed her mom's number, preparing herself for a mix of worry and pride from her parents. Emily? Oh, honey, are you okay? Her mother's voice was filled with concern. I'm fine, Mom, really, Emily assured her. The doctors say I'm healing. Well, I'll be back on my feet in no time. But a bear attack? Oh, Emily, when you told us you were moving to Alaska, we were worried about something like this happening. Emily smiled, hearing the mixture of fear and admiration in her mother's voice. I know, Mom, but remember why I came here? For the adventure, for the beauty of this place. And you know what? Even after this, I wouldn't change a thing. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then her mother sighed. You always were the brave one in the family. We're so proud of you, sweetie. Your father's been telling everyone at his office about his daughter, the bear wrestling nurse. Emily laughed, wincing slightly as the movement jostled her leg. Well, I wouldn't say I wrestled it, but I did stand my ground. As she ended the call with her parents, promising to keep them updated on her recovery, Emily looked out the window at the Alaskan landscape. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Despite everything, she felt a surge of affection for this wild, beautiful place she called home. Tomorrow she would begin her recovery in earnest. There would be physical therapy, follow-up appointments, and undoubtedly some emotional processing to do. But for now, Emily Carter closed her eyes, feeling grateful for her survival and for the opportunity to share her story. In the face of nature's raw power, she had discovered her own strength, and that was a tale worth telling. Chapter 9. The Recovery. The weeks following the bear attack passed in a blur of hospital visits, physical therapy sessions, and an unexpected flurry of media attention. Emily Carter found herself navigating not only her physical recovery, but also the emotional aftermath of her harrowing encounter. 2 weeks after the attack, Emily sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the angry red scars that ran down her thigh. Dr. Nguyen had just finished removing her stitches, and the reality of her close call was etched into her flesh. The scars will fade over time, Dr. Nguyen said gently, noticing Emily's fixed gaze. And you're healing remarkably well. How are you feeling otherwise? Emily looked up, offering a small smile. Physically, I'm feeling stronger every day, but... She trailed off, unsure how to articulate the tumult of emotions she'd been experiencing. Dr. Nguyen pulled up a chair, her expression open and understanding. But emotionally, it's a different story. Emily nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. I keep having these nightmares. I'm back on that trail, but this time the bear spray doesn't work, or I can't run away. I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. That's a normal response to trauma, Emily, Dr. Nguyen assured her. Have you considered talking to someone about this? We have excellent counselors who specialize in trauma recovery. Emily hesitated. As a nurse, she knew the value of mental health support, but it felt strange to be on the receiving end. I guess I thought I could handle it on my own. I mean, I survived the actual attack, right? Shouldn't the aftermath be easier? Dr. Nguyen shook her head. Recovery isn't just physical, Emily. What you went through was traumatic. Talking to a professional can help you process those emotions and develop coping strategies for the nightmares and anxiety. After a moment's consideration, Emily nodded. Okay, I think that might be helpful. The following week, Emily found herself sitting across from Dr. Lisa Kaufman, a trauma counselor with kind eyes and a soothing voice. So, Emily, Dr. Kaufman began, Tell me how you've been coping since the attack." Emily took a deep breath. "It's been challenging. The physical recovery is going well, but I'm struggling with anxiety. I used to love running those trails, but now the thought of going back there terrifies me." Dr. Kaufman nodded understandingly. "That's a common reaction after a traumatic event like yours. Have you tried returning to the trail since the attack?" Emily shook her head. "No, I haven't been able to bring myself to do it yet. I know I need to at some point, but the fear is overwhelming," Dr. Kaufman finished for her. "That's okay, Emily. Recovery is a process, and it's important not to rush it. We'll work on techniques to manage your anxiety and gradually work towards facing those fears." Over the next few weeks, Emily worked with Dr. Kaufman on various coping strategies. They practiced breathing exercises, mindfulness techniques, and talked through Emily's fears and anxieties. One session, about a month after the attack, Dr. Kaufman proposed an idea. "Emily, I think you might be ready to take a small step towards reclaiming your love for the outdoors. How would you feel about a short walk in a park? Not the trail where the attack happened, but somewhere with other people around." Emily felt her heart rate quicken at the suggestion, but she also felt a glimmer of determination. I think I'd like to try that." The next day, Emily found herself standing at the entrance to Creamer's Field Migratory Waterfowl Refuge, a popular bird-watching spot in Fairbanks. She could see families strolling along the paths, children laughing and pointing at the birds. It was a far cry from the solitary trail where she'd encountered the bear, but it was still outdoors, still surrounded by nature. Taking a deep breath, Emily took her first step onto the path. She focused on her breathing, just as Dr. Kaufman had taught her. In for 4 counts, hold for 7, out for 8. She felt her racing heart begin to slow. As she walked, Emily found herself noticing the beauty around her. The vibrant colors of the autumn leaves, the calls of the migratory birds, the crisp Alaskan air filling her lungs. For the first time since the attack, she felt a spark of the joy that had initially drawn her to Alaska's wilderness, encouraged. By this small victory, Emily gradually increased her outdoor activities. She joined a local hiking group, finding comfort and support in the company of others who shared her love for nature. Slowly but surely, she began to reclaim her confidence in the outdoors. 6 weeks after the attack, Emily stood at the trailhead where her encounter with the bear had occurred. Ranger Holbrook stood beside her, having offered to accompany her on this significant step in her recovery. "You ready for this, Emily?" Ranger Holbrook asked, his voice gentle but encouraging. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the familiar flutter of anxiety in her stomach, but alongside it was a steely determination. "I think so. I need to do this." As they set off down the trail, Emily found herself hyper-aware of every sound, every movement in the underbrush. But she kept walking, kept breathing, kept reminding herself of how far she'd come. When they reached the spot where the attack had occurred, Emily paused. The forest looked different in the warm light of late summer, peaceful and alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. "You know," Emily said, her voice quiet but steady, "I was so focused on the fear and the trauma, I almost forgot why I fell in love with this place to begin with." Ranger Holbrook nodded, understanding in his eyes. Nature has a way of reminding us of its beauty, even after it's shown us its danger. As they completed the hike and returned to the trailhead, Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The fear wasn't gone entirely, and she knew she still had work to do in her recovery. But she had faced her fears and taken back a piece of herself that the attack had threatened to steal away. That evening, as Emily sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the Alaskan sky in brilliant hues, she reflected on her journey. The physical scars were healing, fading a little more each day. The emotional scars were taking longer, but she could feel those healing too. She thought about the bear somewhere out in the vast Alaskan wilderness. There was still fear there, yes, but also a newfound respect. This was their home too, and learning to coexist safely was part of the beauty and challenge of living in this wild place. As the last light faded from the sky, Emily made a decision. Tomorrow, she would lace up her running shoes again. She would start small, maybe just a jog around her neighborhood. But it was a start, a step towards reclaiming not just her love for running, but her place in this wild, beautiful land she had chosen as her home. The road to recovery stretched out before her, much like the trails she longed to run again. It would be challenging, sometimes frightening, but ultimately rewarding. And Emily Carter was ready to take it one step at a time. Chapter 10. The return. 6 weeks had passed since Emily Carter's terrifying encounter with the bear. The physical wounds had healed, leaving behind faint scars that served as a permanent reminder of her brush with nature's raw power. The emotional scars, while less visible, were slowly fading too, thanks to her sessions with Dr. Kaufman and her own determination to reclaim her life. As the first rays of dawn broke over the Alaskan landscape, Emily stood on her porch, running, shoes in hand. She took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp morning air that held the promise of autumn. Today was the day she had been both anticipating and dreading, her first run since the attack. "You can do this, Emily," she whispered to herself, lacing up her shoes with slightly trembling hands. She had prepared for this moment. In the weeks following the attack, she had gradually increased her outdoor activities, starting with short walks in populated parks and progressing to hikes with a local group. But this solo run felt different, more significant. Emily stepped off her porch, her feet crunching on the gravel driveway. She paused at the end, looking down the road that led to her usual trail. The forest loomed in the distance, a mix of spruce and birch trees painted in the warm hues of early fall. For a moment, fear threatened to overwhelm her. Memories of the bear, its powerful form charging towards her, flashed through her mind. Emily closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and recalled Dr. Kaufman's words. "Fear is natural, but it doesn't have to control you. Acknowledge it, then choose to move forward." With renewed determination, Emily began to jog, not towards the trail, but down the road in the opposite direction. She had decided to start small, running a loop around her neighborhood before attempting the trail again. As she settled into her rhythm, the familiar sensation of her feet hitting the pavement and her breath falling into a steady pattern began to wash away her anxiety. The cool morning air filled her lungs, invigorating her. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt truly alive, truly herself. Halfway through her planned route, Emily paused to catch her breath and take a sip of water. As she stood there, a neighbor she recognized, Mrs. Johnson, approached her, walking her dog. "Emily, it's so good to see you out and about," Mrs. Johnson called out, her wrinkled face creasing into a warm smile. "How are you doing, dear?" Emily smiled back, touched by the genuine concern in her neighbor's voice. "I'm doing much better, Mrs. Johnson. Taking it one day at a time?" Mrs. Johnson nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit. You know, we've all been rooting for you. What happened was terrible, but the way you've handled it, well, you're an inspiration to us all." Emily felt a lump form in her throat, overwhelmed by the unexpected support. "Thank you," she managed. "That means a lot." As Mrs. Johnson continued on her walk, Emily resumed her run, her heart lighter. She hadn't realized how much the community's support meant to her until that moment. As she neared the end of her planned route, Emily found herself approaching the turnoff to the trailhead. She slowed to a walk, her heart rate picking up, and not just from the exertion. The trail beckoned, a familiar path now fraught with new meaning. Emily stood at the intersection, torn between the safety of the road and the challenge of the trail. She reached for the bear spray clipped to her belt, a new larger canister that she now carried religiously. Its weight was reassuring. "Okay, Emily," she said aloud. "You don't have to do the whole trail. Just to the first bend. You can do that." Taking a deep breath, Emily stepped onto the trail. The change from pavement to packed earth under her feet sent a shiver of apprehension through her. But she kept moving, her senses hyper-alert, taking in every sound and movement around her. The forest seemed different now. Before the attack, she had run this trail hundreds of times, often lost in thought or focused on her pace. Now she noticed everything. The way the early morning light filtered through the leaves, the chorus of bird songs, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. As she approached the first bend in the trail, her self-imposed limit for today, Emily slowed to a walk. Her heart was pounding, but not just from exertion. She had done it. She had returned to the trail. Pausing to catch her breath, Emily looked around. The spot where the attack had happened was still a quarter-mile ahead. She wasn't ready for that. Yet but standing here, surrounded by the beauty of the Alaskan wilderness, she knew she would be someday. As Emily turned to head back, a flash of movement caught her eye. For a split second, panic surged through her, but then she saw it clearly. A snowshoe hare, its coat beginning to turn white for the winter, hopping across the trail. Emily let out a laugh, relief and joy bubbling up inside her. The hare paused, nose twitching, before disappearing into the underbrush. In that moment, Emily felt a profound connection to the wilderness around her. This was why she had fallen in love with Alaska, why she had chosen to make her home here despite the risks. The jog back to her house felt easier, lighter. As Emily stepped onto her porch, she felt a sense of accomplishment wash over her. She had faced her fears and taken the first step towards reclaiming her passion for running and her love for the Alaskan wilderness. Later that evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Emily sat on her porch, nursing a cup of hot tea. She pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Hey, Mom," she said when her mother answered. "Emily. How are you, sweetie? How was your day?" Emily smiled, hearing the mix of love and lingering concern in her mother's voice. "I'm good. Mom, really good. I went for a run today." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "On the trail?" her mother asked, her voice cautious. "Part of it," Emily replied. "I didn't go all the way, but I'm getting there." "Oh, honey," her mother's voice was thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you. Are you sure you're okay, though? You're being careful, right?" Emily chuckled softly. "Yes, Mom, I'm being careful. I've got my bear spray and I'm taking it slow, but I need to do this. This place, these trails, they're part of who I am." As she talked with her mother, recounting her day and her plans for gradually increasing her trail runs, Emily felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The attack had changed her, there was no denying that. But it hadn't broken her. If anything, it had revealed a strength she didn't know she possessed. After ending the call, Emily stood up and looked out over the darkening Alaskan landscape. In the distance, she could just make out the line of trees where the trail began. Tomorrow she decided she would run a little further, and the day after that a little further still. The trail was waiting, and Emily Carter was ready to meet its challenges. With each step, each run, she was reclaiming not just her passion for running, but her place in this wild, beautiful land she called home. The bear attack was part of her story now, but it was not the end of it. It was simply another chapter in her Alaskan adventure, one that had taught her the true meaning of resilience, courage, and the indomitable human spirit. As night fell over Fairbanks, Emily headed inside, already looking forward to the morning. She knew there would still be difficult days ahead, moments of fear and doubt, but she also knew she was strong enough to face them. One step at a time, one run at a time, she would continue to heal, to grow, and to embrace the wild beauty of her Alaskan home.